So let us know when you're ready to start, and we'll start the streaming.
I'm ready. Hello and welcome to the June 6, 2024 Planning and Zoning Commission meeting. I'll be your acting chair, Jeffrey Barton. Planning and Zoning Commission will hear public comment only on the items listed on tonight's agenda. Members of the public will be given 3 minutes to speak if speaking as an individual, or 10 minutes to speak as a primary spokesperson of a group. We, of course, welcome written comments in advance by email to pzcommissioners@asheville.nc.gov. And with that, I'll kick it over to Will for a roll call.
Thank you. Acting Chair Barton.
Present.
Commissioner Wheatley.
Present.
Commissioner Cycle.
Present.
Commissioner Greiner.
Present.
Commissioner Faircloth.
Present.
And Commissioner Bean.
Present.
We have a quorum.
Thank you. And as we've been doing for the last few meetings, I'd like to invite Commissioner Wheatley to offer a land acknowledgement.
Thank you, Chair Barton, Interim Chair Barton. As we are gathered today as the Planning and Zoning Commission, the body tasked with reviewing and advising on appropriate land use in the city of Asheville, it is fitting to acknowledge the storied history of this land. We occupy the land of the Cherokee people, who have stewarded and been in relationship with these mountains and waterways from time immemorial. The land is occupied through violence, oppression, coercion, broken treaties, and forced relocation. Please join me in expressing respect and gratitude for the present-day Eastern Band of Cherokee Indians, the Cherokee Nation, and United Gadua Bands of Cherokee, and all the indigenous neighbors, as well as the past and present marginalized community members, as we seek to join in the healing of the indelible traumas that are embedded in these lands.
Thank you. Moving into the agenda, we have a couple items that we're going to shift around. The last item on the agenda under other business, consideration of amendments to the Commission's rules and procedures. We're actually going to move to be the third item in the administrative section of the agenda so that we discuss and deliberate that before having the elections. So with that, we'll move to the first item under the administrative section of the agenda, approval of the minutes from the May 1st, 2024 meeting. Has everybody had a chance to take a look? We did have a couple of comments, clarifications to add to the minutes. One under the 57 Max Street item, it would be my request that we note that there was a lot of conversation around the landscape buffer requirements and some discussion with staff about some changes that may happen between residential districts. And I think that'd be great to just note in the minutes since it was a substantive item under that agenda item. And then under backyard lots, we did move to recommend approval, but after accepting or adding several conditions, I can send the list. They're also noted in the formal recommendation to council. But
Do you want me to add all the conditions such as they're listed in that recommendation?
I would.
Okay, I can do that.
Any other comments about the minutes? Do I have a motion to approve with those additions? Thank you for the reminder. I'll talk directly into the mic and ask all other commissioners to do the same. Thank you.
I motion to approve the amendments with your mentioned changes to Will Palmquist.
I'll second. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Any opposed?
I wasn't here, so I'll abstain.
All right. The motion passes. Second, under the administrative portion, updates from committee liaisons and work groups. We have a few liaisons serving as members of Planning and Zoning Commission. Commissioner Cycle is our liaison to the Soil Erosion and Stormwater Review Committee, and I understand has not yet been a meeting.
We've not met.
Thank you. Next up, our liaison to the Multimodal Transportation Commission, Commissioner Wheatley. Any report back from MMTC?
Yeah, at the latest MMTC meeting, Vidila Satvika presented the parking amendment, text amendment that we put forward, which removed all residential parking requirements along transit corridors and within a half mile of transit stops. And Multimodal Transportation Committee was very supportive of that and are happy to hear we're moving forward with that and are excited to see council adopt it. There was really robust discussion about the market understanding the demand for parking, maybe better than our UDO, and being a little bit more adaptable to the parking climate within our city and having it in a less structured way. So I think most of the conversation actually moved around potentially completely working towards abolishing residential parking minimums throughout the city. So they're really, I'll say, very strongly in support of removing those parking minimums. And Will, just a heads up, I am going to want that noted. The MMTC support of the parking thresholds. Additionally, they spoke about the affordable housing for Buncombe County coming to Cox Avenue and a street closure at Sawyer Street. If the commissioners may be familiar with the current Buncombe County voting building. It's a blue pre-engineered metal building right across from the main bus station downtown. Basically, the current design of the building is required to bridge across Sawyer Street due to affordable housing financing mechanisms. I'm going to use the wrong tool. What's the financing tool? The LightTech loans require that they're all on one site. And for that to happen, they have to close Sawyer Street. How it relates to us is not the closure of the street so much as the conditions for which multimodal would like to be included. However, they don't have any tools to include conditions on the building itself as part of the closure of Sawyer Street. They can either vote to close it for the project or not close it. We review the building and will review the building. And so what they've asked us to include is continual pedestrian access through the breezeway. As I said, the building's actually intended to bridge Sawyer Street. And so I would appreciate if the secretary would note each of their conditions so we can, at a later date when that project comes back to us, easily identify that they've requested this from us. So continual pedestrian access through the breezeway, an active transportation lane through the breezeway, and they would like to make sure that we thoroughly review emergency access options through that breezeway as well, because Sawyer Street is an active street that provides both parking and access to residential housing that already exists, single-family homes and otherwise, near Church Street. So I think, additionally, one thing they discussed to pretty good depth is the $14 million capital improvement project on Cox Avenue, which some years back there was basically an informal introduction of additional stop signs and traffic calming measures on Cox Avenue. I think the transit department or transportation department has seen that as a benefit to the neighborhood and the businesses, and so they're going to make some of that permanent, as well as providing 10-foot sidewalks and things like that. So And I think that's a big benefit to that corridor in downtown.
Great, thanks for the thorough report back. The last work group update is from our own Planning Zoning Commission Housing Work Group, which includes Commissioners Bean and Faircloth. I joined with the absence of our former chair, but we met on May 28th. Any comments from what we discussed or what we want to look at moving forward?
It's good to reconvene. Excited to keep working on it. I don't have any takeaways.
I mean, I think we were still kind of in a regroup phase with some change in membership as far as what the actual goals were for there. So we had a good discussion about trying to lay out what those actual goals are. I took away broadly just trying to make sure we were working in tandem with some of the other groups like affordable housing, as well as, you know, the county zoning commissioners too, just tried to, so we kind of set some game plans for how to engage with those groups, and, you know, we're kind of in a fact-finding phase. That's kind of where we're at.
Great, yeah, and I appreciated Commissioner Faircloth as one of our county appointees, kind of offering to follow the county comp plan implementation and the housing policies that unfold, and see how, you know, our purview under the City of Asheville's UDO can kind of dovetail with what the county's got planning. Another couple things that I remember from our discussion was we talked a little bit about the mechanisms to allow duplexes and townhomes. It's something that's been talked about under the Missing Middle Housing Report, and looks like we'll be hearing from staff in the future about how to make that happen. And then in tandem, keeping the anti-displacement strategies at the forefront and with conversations with the legacy neighborhoods. So thanks everyone for great engagement with other committees and reporting back to the Planning and Zoning Commission. So next up, we'll move on to consideration of amendments to the Commission's Rules of Procedure. Walking us through these proposals will be Mr. Palmquist.
Good evening, Commissioners. So these rules, procedures, updates, mostly the work by our esteemed legal representative Janice Ashley in consultation with staff. So she and I will kind of talk through these. I'll give the overview, and Janice can provide a little more detail as necessary. Some of the more major changes involve what happens in the event of unexpired terms. So similar to how we've been ran last meeting, is the contingency for when the chair resigns and that the vice chair would fill in an acting capacity. Special elections will be held at the next available meeting and will serve until the regular election date, which is already stated to be in October. Similarly, also on top of that, if the acting vice chair is nominated and elected for chair, then elections will be held for the vice chair. Similarly, if the vice chair resigns, elections for the vice chair will be held at the next available meeting. Other changes involve cleaning up some of the language around conflicts of, voting.
Well, that one's just about, you really can't excuse yourself from voting. We used to always refer to the statute, the 160A, 75, but nobody knows what that is. So I said, let's just pull out the language. This is what council has to follow as well, that you need to know that, usually if somebody says, well, I'm just going to abstain, I will normally say a board member has a duty to vote. But this makes it clear that if you do say, no, I'm still not going to vote, it's going to count as a failure to vote. And if you withdraw but you've not been excused by the majority, will be recorded as an affirmative vote. And that's what council has to follow. So just next time if I tell you to vote, either you can choose, but if you don't, it's going to be an affirmative vote. So just know that. So that was just a cleanup. That was always there, but it just wasn't really explained.
Other revisions include some additional language regarding legislative hearings and also quasi-judicial hearings for when the PZC acts in a quasi-judicial manner to act in reviewing special use permits. And then also, in addition to acting as the Board of Adjustment for the Central Business District variances, the P&Z also acts as the Board of Adjustment for design standards in the Neighborhood Corridor District and the Urban Residential District, so we got that in there as well. And then cleaning up some language about special use permits in here, and also that you can email or mail the results of that, or personally deliver the results of those decisions. I think that's it.
Thank you. Any comments, questions?
So do you need a motion? I'd like to make a motion to approve.
Second?
We have a motion and a second. Any further conversation? We don't need to open this to public comment, do we? Administrator? All right, all those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion passes unanimously to adopt the updated rules of procedure. And with that done, next we'll move to election of chair and vice chair. So the way this will work, we'll, I guess, take nominations, and maybe we'll start with the chair. Maybe a boring nomination process, because under our rules of procedure, to serve as the chair, you have to have served on Planning and Zoning Commission for 1 year and be a resident business owner or property owner in the city of Asheville. So we think there's only one eligible candidate.
I move.
Nonetheless, I'm proud to nominate you, Jeffrey. You were an amazing candidate,
No.
albeit the only one.
I thank you. I accept the nomination for chair. Any other discussion?
Move that we close the nominations.
All right.
And you have to vote.
So,
Somebody moved, there's a second, all those.
Any-
Do the one at a time, I think.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I move to vote for chair.
so wait, we had a motion from Commissioner Bean.
Yes, I move to nominate you.
To nominate.
Cycle,
Second.
Okay, all those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion passes unanimously. So next we'll take nominations for vice chair. I'd like to make a nomination of Commissioner Greiner for the position of vice chair. Any other nominations? Hearing none, I'll make a motion to elect Commissioner Greiner as the vice chair.
Second.
All those in favor say aye. Aye. Motion, any opposed? Motion passes unanimously. All right, we have a new chair and vice chair.
And those are interim positions until October, when your regular terms, you vote again.
Thank you.
We have a number of continuances as well. Expecting a lot of those to actually be on the July agenda, so that might be a very long meeting, or I can try to, staff will do our best to manage the workload too, so it doesn't all hit at once. But I know those have been on there for a few months now, but I think a lot of them are coming to a head, so.
Great, yeah. Can I do these all as one? And do I have to read all the PIN numbers, or just
Well,
continue
you
items?
probably have to go through and say which ones are being continued. but-
Gotcha.
Just generally the nature of the item and maybe the address, but not like the entire description, right? There's a lot of them.
Okay.
Right.
Yeah.
I'll do my best.
Okay.
So we're considering continuing items 4, 5, and 6 on the agenda. So 4 is a quasi-judicial public hearing, a request for a special use permit for a group home located at 130 Rock Hill Road. Item number 5 is a legislative public hearing request to amend the conditional zoning for property located at 179 and 144 Riverside Drive for the purposes of amending the site plan and number of proposed residential units. And then number 6 on the agenda is a request to rezone property located at 99999 Long Shoals Road from residential single-family low-density RS2 to highway business.
I have one question on number 6. Sometimes when we're going to continue a project, we have additional information on it, and it's pretty hard to look up 99999 Long Shoals Road. Is there an address attached to that at all, or some way to kind of, I'm just really interested in why that one keeps getting kicked down the road. Is that at the request of the applicant, or?
Yes, at the request of the applicant.
And I guess it should be noted that all of these are being continued to date certain July 11th, our next meeting of the Planning and Zoning Commission. So between now and then, Commissioner Wheatley, you can look up on GIS the PIN number and check out what's going on there.
All right, I'll dig hard. It should be a good conversation. I like digging hard and having tough conversations.
Do I have a motion to continue these 3 items?
So moved.
Second.
We have a motion and a second. All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? All right, the motion passes unanimously. So, moving on to our first substantive item under the legislative public hearings, item number 7, we have a request to conditionally rezone property located at 172 Moody Avenue from highway business HB and residential multifamily low-density RM6 to commercial expansion conditional zone CON-EXP-CZ. The properties are identified as pins 9617-55-4906, 9617-55-0346, 9617-55-0206, 9617-55-0286, 9617-55-0102, 9617-45-9156, 9617-55-5325, and 9617-56-4897 in the Buncombe County Tax Record. The property owners are Acton Woods LLC, Thomas and Laura Thrash, Thrash Limited Partnership, and Jones Graveyard. The applicant contact is Mr. Dwight Kensel. Planner coordinating review is Will Palmquist. Mr. Palmquist.
Thank you, Chair. Good evening again, Commissioners. This is a conditional zoning request for a project known as Acton Hill. So this is the site that comprises all those 8 properties that Chair Barton bravely read to us. You can see they total 42.65 acres. It's located in western Asheville off of Smoky Park Highway at the corner of Moody Avenue with Acton Woods Road to the north of the site. You can see from this imagery and the topography that there is a lot of topography as it slopes up from Smoky Park Highway. So you'll see that the site has been designed around some of those constraints. So the existing zoning is a combination of highway business and residential multifamily low density. Due to the proposed number of units being more than 50 acres and also the square footage being over 100,000 square feet, a conditional zoning to the commercial expansion conditional zone is required. The future land use existing in the comprehensive plan is a combination of urban corridor and residential neighborhood. No change in that would be required. So I've kind of annotated these site plans a little bit to help walk through the site a little bit because it is such a large site and there's relative complexity going on here. This slide is showing the site plan and also highlighting some of the existing features of the site. The first, I'll kind of start at the bottom left here, is an existing graveyard that's to remain and be undisturbed. There is a 70-foot wide utility easement for a transmission line for power that runs through the middle of the site essentially. So that's impacts where buildings and such can be located. An existing cell tower to remain on the northern side of the site. And at the very north of the site, there is an existing multifamily development with 20 residential units that would remain and be incorporated into this conditional zoning. So as far as the proposed site plan, this slide details the residential components. So there is a combination of commercial and residential being proposed here. As far as the residential goes, there's a total of 350 units proposed across 8 buildings. Essentially, there are a number of multifamily buildings that are 4 to 5 stories built into the slope, different kind of types as they're described in the site plan. Type A buildings have 60 units each and are 4 and 5 stories. They're located here in the southwest corner of the site and also on the eastern side of the site. There's one Type B building with 90 units. So it's a little larger building at 4 or 5 stories located in this portion of the site. And then 3 Type C buildings with 45 units at 5 stories each, located here, here, and here. There's also a clubhouse building with proposed amenity space and townhomes in the very north of the site with 4 units total at about 25 feet in height. And as far as the commercial plans for the site, basically there is one concrete proposed commercial use located on what's called Lot 1 on the eastern side of the site that fronts Smoky Park Highway. It's for a grocery store at 20,655 square feet in 1 story, 29 feet in height. The other 2 sites are more, they're going to be a part of a future development plan. So the full, the tenants and the type of projects being proposed are not known at this time. So designing the site in a way that responds to the comprehensive plan and is oriented, towards Smoky Park Highway and is those kinds of ideals is hard to do. So for now, they're cited as future development sites. Lot 2, likely a commercial site, and then Lot 3, either commercial site or the potential for a mixed-use, multi-story project as well. So that would require a amendment to this conditional zoning if it were approved at a future date. So this slide details the transportation network. As far as the pedestrian connections go, there are a lot of new sidewalks being proposed and built. The orange line on the southern side of the site along Smoky Park Highway is a new 10-foot wide sidewalk with 5-foot wide utility strip. And then the yellow lines internal to the site are these 6-foot wide sidewalks. There are also a number of walking paths, so non-paved paths that would not necessarily be ADA accessible given the topography, that would connect more directly between the commercial and residential uses as well. An existing roadway is Acton Woods, which runs through this site, this portion of the site to the north, and it would connect into new roads proposed as part of this development. There are 3 new curb cuts and driveways into the site, 2 from Smoky Park Highway and 1 from Moody Avenue. The landscaping plan is quite extensive as well, given the size of the project, the number of street trees required throughout the site, the street buffering between any parking lots and in the streets, parking lot landscapings internally, building impact landscaping, and then finally with a green line around the exterior of the site is a property line buffer that's required between this proposed zoning district and the surrounding residential zoning districts. It's a 30-foot wide buffer. There is a portion of it that's being requested as a technical modification to have structures encroach into it approximately 2,600 square feet. Open space is provided at 17.7% of the site, where 10% is required, and tree canopy preservation is proposed at 19% total, where 11% would be comprised of preserved canopy and 8% would be comprised of new tree plantings. So one of the conditions is that a traffic impact analysis would be required. That'd be through the typical NCDOT process, and the project would implement any of those recommendations identified through that review process. There are also a number of technical modifications being requested through this conditional zoning process. If you recall the site plan earlier, some of the buildings, the commercial expansion requires buildings be located on streets and not have parking lots in front of them. This design would need special relief from those requirements. So the first modification would be to allow buildings oriented internally and towards the interior streets, or they're otherwise required to be oriented towards the primary access corridor and street corners for corner lots. Similarly, parking lots to be located between buildings and the primary street, where they're otherwise required to be at the side or the rear of the buildings. Both of these conditions would not apply to the future development at lots 2 and 3. If modifications were required for those future development phases, they'd have to be entitled separately through that conditional zoning amendment process. The third condition is that it would allow allowance for building heights up to 60 feet that are within a 100-foot residential transition area, so where the maximum building height is otherwise 40 feet. So there's a 100-foot wide buffer from the residential zoned areas that limit the height to that residential district, which is 40 feet. And there are 2 buildings, I believe, that are 60 feet in height proposed and within that 100-foot transition area. 6-foot wide sidewalks internal to the site where 8-foot wide sidewalks are otherwise required. And as previously mentioned, the encroachment into the Type B landscape buffer from the existing multifamily buildings totaling approximately 2,600 square feet. The project was reviewed by the Technical Review Committee at the March 18th meeting and approved with conditions. Staff finds that the project is consistent with the, I should say, existing future land use map, which includes a residential neighborhood, which is described as benefiting from having a more diversity of housing types, such as small scale, such as accessory apartments, duplexes, and other types of small scale infill housing, and as well as urban corridor, which talks about redevelopment of mixed-use residential, commercial, and office uses that place a emphasis on pedestrian-friendly amenities and infrastructure. The project will also support a number of goals in the comprehensive plan, such as providing infill development, increasing the rental housing supply, establishing accessible and well-connected commercial nodes consistent with strategies outlined in the plan's growth areas, and eliminating gaps in the citywide sidewalk network. For that reason, staff is recommending approval of the proposed conditional zoning, not amendment, with the attached Exhibit E project conditions. I'm glad to answer any questions. We also have the applicant here with us this evening.
Any questions for staff?
What's the proposed buffer around the green line? What, is that plants? What's?
The green line around the perimeter of the property. So that's, it's a buffer that requires a certain number of trees and shrubs planted per linear feet, essentially. I don't know the numbers off the top of my head, but it's a screening buffer. It's noise and dust and that kind of thing buffer. So it's a planted buffer.
Okay.
On that landscape plan page L1, it almost looks like the Acton Woods Road where the Type C building is, like that does continue down to the grocery store. Am I misreading that? I felt like on the other site plan, it looked like that was just walking path, but it's
As far as the sidewalk goes,
like right there, it's labeled as a sidewalk, but on the landscape plan, it's drawn out. Then on the next slide, maybe I'm misreading how it's, and that can be a question I can send to the applicant after they
Okay.
present too. Maybe I just
we can
misread.
ask them to clarify what they're proposing exactly. I know at this scale, it's kind of hard to tell.
Okay, I might just be misreading it.
we can definitely have them clarify.
Okay, and I got one or two other questions, but I think I'll wait till the applicant gets up here.
Great. Would you like to hear from the applicant?
Yes, please.
Great. I'll leave on this slide for now.
I will inevitably forget. They tell me that's a sewer easement, so
Oh, okay.
we can circle back to it. I would totally forget that. My name is Derek Allen. I'm with Allen, Stahl, and Kilborn. We represent the developer and development team. We have some folks with us tonight. Curtis Williams, who's representing the Thrash family. The Thrash family has owned this particular piece of property for more than 75 years. Our engineers are here from ACE, Dwight Kinzel and Brad Howell. This is a project that has been back and forth with TRC a bunch. It's a big project, and there are lots of things that needed to get worked out before it gets considered by a body like this. This property looks and feels like a lot of the county projects I see come across my desk. It kind of feels that way when you drive out there, and it probably will come as no surprise that this property has been in a bona fide farm program in North Carolina with the agricultural exemption for years and years. When we came through and did the pre-app meeting with staff, these things were identified, and we're trying to bring it into the city in terms of development, even though it's been annexed for a minute. Same thing came up with our neighbor meeting. Our neighbor meeting, we had about 75 folks show up, work through issues and questions that folks had, and I'm not aware of any neighbor comments. I'm not sure if anybody's here tonight from the neighborhood. I don't think so. That would surprise me. So it's by and large been our development team going back and forth with city staff as well as NCDOT. One thing I did want to address, one of the conditions is that a traffic impact analysis be done. That's been done. It's been submitted to NCDOT with recommendations from our traffic engineer. We've gone back and forth with NCDOT on this. It's a very busy highway out there with the mitigation measures that they wanted to see. They've now approved the traffic impact analysis and all the mitigation measures that are included therein. So we have no problem with that condition in terms of coming from staff. The project is designed very intentionally to have the most intense parts, the commercial parts, up on the highway and to taper back into the existing neighborhood. Part of that existing neighborhood are properties, residential properties that are owned by the Thrash family. We look at this as an opportunity, and I think staff has taken the same approach as really creating a master plan for a large tract that normally would take years to develop across multiple property owners and developers. In addition to the grocery store, which we think is a great piece, this is designed for folks to live in and be residents in and have a community. There are a number of parks, dog parks, playground, a pool, clubhouse, gazebo, mail kiosk, grilling areas. There are over 2 miles of sidewalks internal to this project. There's a half a mile of walking paths internal to this project, and that's all very intentional to make it feel, look, and operate like a community. It meets a number of the comp plan pieces, and I know that Will has gone over that, and that's in your report. But encouraging responsible growth, increasing and diversifying the housing supply, facilitating real estate development by maximizing public benefit, making it more comfortable and connected in terms of walkability, and then those pieces that are set out in the residential neighborhood and urban corridor, and really with pedestrian-friendly amenities and infrastructure. And here, the project's big enough where those pedestrian-friendly amenities and infrastructure are internal to the site. The technical modifications that have been requested for a site this large really are relatively minor. The ones on the commercial pieces on the front, in terms of the building orientation and the parking lots, are driven by both the topography. It's lower at the front and steeper in the back, as well as some pretty major easements, including Duke Power easements for some huge transmission lines that are coming through there. On the building heights that are within a 100-foot residential transition area, it's only 2 buildings, so it's just one of those things where we wanted to provide the housing, and that's the way that we're able to do that. On the sidewalks, 8-foot reduced down to 6-foot wide sidewalks. We have lots of 10-foot wide sidewalks in this site. We can't make all of them 8 feet, so we went for uniformity on those 6-foot wide sidewalks. And on the encroachment into the landscape buffer from the existing multifamily, I know it's in the actual language of it, but that already exists, so we're not changing anything there. I would like to propose something that Will and I keep talking about and we forgot to do on this one. That is condition number 17. We would like that to be a 5-year validity period, and there's some new language that Will and Janice and I have been working on that's more reflective of what's in the ordinance in terms of expiration of CZ permits, but we can work with that in between now and City Council. I'm here, our development team's here. Any questions you have about the programming or the site plan or anything else of this project, we would welcome now and ask for your vote.
Just one clarification on the validity of the conditional zoning. The draft conditions that we have a 5-year period, so maybe that's already been worked out.
Perfect. I like the Kreskin. I anticipated that. Thank you, Will.
Any questions from commissioners?
Yeah, I have a number of questions. You know, I know you point out a lot, the amount of sidewalk, the amount of natural surface trail. But to me, from a circulation standpoint, this does feel very vehicular heavy. Some of the sidewalks, for example, when you come in, let's look at C 2.2, for example. Let's say you're coming in from Smoky Park Highway from the east, you come up, and let's say you're trying to get to the natural surface trail, the sidewalk dead ends, there's no crosswalk. As I'm walking myself through this site in general, and I got a number of them and I can point them all out, but as I'm walking through myself through this site, feels a little maze-like as a pedestrian. You know, you have to get really familiar with the site. You have to maybe probably live there for a couple months before you can know the exact path to take in and out of the development. So there's just a number of possible crosswalks or connectivity issues that I would like to see improved. Because if I were to buy a unit here, especially with, I think, a pretty awesome connection to the Buncombe County Sports Complex with that road, Road A, that goes to that intersection. I could see me and my kids taking a bike over there across that bridge. That, you know, it's kind of barricaded, but we'd still get past that right now.
Just bunny hop it, you're fine.
Yeah, and then go to the soccer fields. You know, my boys play soccer. So I would like to be able to either walk there or bike there. And so from a walking perspective, again, on that road, that one intersection, there's no crosswalk to get to the sidewalk that leads to Building 1, for example. Unless I'm on the right side of the road, as I'm coming in. If I happen to be on the left side of the road, you know, I just have to know that. That's my point. I would have to know to stay on the right side of the road. Otherwise, I would reach a section where I'm like having to cross the road. And, you know, with little kids, I don't want to chance myself. I'd like to have a crosswalk. And then as far as biking, I was just curious about, you know, there aren't any bike facilities because I noticed the roads are 22 feet wide. For me, as a designer, I think 6 feet sidewalk is kind of too small to accommodate. It's not a multi-use path. That is a pedestrian path. So, you know, it is kind of a neighborhood setting, so we're biking in the middle of the road. I think that's kind of fine, but I was just kind of wanted to point that out, that this does feel like a very vehicular-focused plan first, whereas cycle, pedestrian feels considered a little after. I want someone else to speak, and then I can go back and kind of point out each one if that's helpful.
Yeah, if I could build on that, I think that's there's some astute observations there, and you know, part of the challenge with this site is you're trying to maximize the commercial viable properties along Smoky Park, but then still have a considerable amount of multifamily behind. It's, a good development pattern, but the circulation is the key. When those multifamily tenants then cross over with the traffic coming in and out for those higher intensity commercial uses, it might be a good idea to think about how to get the multifamily tenants past the commercial parcels and, safely across Smoky Park Highway. So I think it's a really wonderful observation. I look forward to hearing kind of the specifics of how to accomplish that. But in my mind, perhaps adding some facilities along, one of those drive aisles to make it sort of that primary connection to particularly the recreation facilities across, could go a long way, because then you're creating an awareness from vehicular traffic accessing the commercial parcels that there is some, bike and pedestrian traffic going across. One other observation I'll make, this site has a lot of challenges, so I really applaud you kind of working within the sandbox that you have. There's, of all of the linear footage of sidewalk and trails that you mentioned, I didn't hear linear footage or height of retaining walls, and there are a lot in this project, and that's necessary to do a development here. But in particular, I'd like to hear a little bit about, it's sort of a two-part question. The very large retaining wall to the west of the property, I think it's indicated on the plans as max 27 feet. And did I get that wrong?
Yeah.
A sort of a tandem question to that is in the transportation, in the TRC report, transportation indicated a desire for maybe right in, right out on the Brookside Circle Drive, and I'd love to hear how the traffic impact analysis advised you all and whether that access point is really needed for the development.
The one on Brookside Circle?
Correct, yeah. Because
Yeah.
it seems like, that it's not directly related to the retaining wall, but that creates a constraint, kind of pushing the multifamily building back, trying to fit in the number of parking north of that. So I'm kind of curious if you all explored what if that access point didn't exist, or what is the traffic impact analysis been showing you on that one?
We have explored that option, and that's still a possibility, I guess, to eliminate that connection. However, there were mitigation or measures, that NCDOT wanted us to put in place in Smoky Park Highway, like that. There's a median now, or like a little, I think it's 4 foot wide, in the middle of Smoky Park Highway to eliminate people from taking a left into Brookside Circle. I thought that was a kind of a hazard area, so those measures have been taken into place. I guess I'm still confused on which retaining wall are you referring to?
So,
the one by
just
the
north of that, to the left of building one. Yeah.
and what was the question in regards to the retaining wall?
Just the height of it and what you're kind of working between the cemetery, which has its own retaining, and then the west property line. So is the height of that retaining wall a factor of the number of units trying to accommodate in that building, or are there other site constraints that are driving the height of that one?
Dwight, you might need to speak on that retaining wall.
A lot of fill is what it is, really. That retaining wall is roughly 20 feet tall. And it's mostly coming up and around.
Could you come up and speak into the mic? Yeah. And
Dwight's
please
our master grade.
state your name.
Yeah, okay. So, as you follow kind of, I guess that's Road C, coming up and around the cemetery.
Can you state your name?
Oh, I'm sorry, Dwight Kensel. So basically trying to get up to the residential in the back and all that, climbing up and around the cemetery to also not impact the cemetery too bad. And then also, that kind of peaks around where Road C and Road D come together. And then basically we just try to drop back down as fast as we can into apartment building A right there, or that building. So it ends up being a whole lot of fill in that area. And that wall to the west of that building is really just holding that pad up for the parking primarily. It is a 5-4 split, so it'll have, it's like 10-foot drop as it kind of comes back down, but that's really what it's primarily there for.
The 5-4 split is the
So,
five.
yeah, the 5's in the back, or towards, on the Smoky Park Highway
Right.
side. Yep. And then it'll be 4 foot on the parking lot side, the 4 store.
Thank you.
So, for the commercial building with the parking condition, the parking in the front, you know, I get that. The parking facing the Smoky Park Highway, what was keeping that from being flip-flopped with the buildings, so that the buildings?
Okay, it's on the grocery store lot we're talking?
Yeah.
Okay,
Mhm.
so we looked at mirroring that to kind of bring the loading to the front and move the parking to the back. The issue there is we can only go to a 4-to-1 slope inside of that Duke easement, that 70-foot Duke easement that's right there, which is what's kind of carving that parking lot out.
Right.
And the issue is we can't get the WB 67 truck
Got it.
into that spot, so it kind of forces it back to that side.
That makes sense.
And
Thank
the
you.
only option at that point would be to lose the parking.
Yeah, there's
And the fall zone.
fall zones to the north and south on that parking lot that are, you know, kind of pinch points.
Yep.
You can't get in inside of those. Great. Or not.
The building can't go inside.
The
of
building
fall
can't.
zones. Correct.
This is a small thing, but that entry from Smoky Park Highway up to that parking lot, that looks like a significant amount of grade. I didn't see any stairs on the plans. It looked like it was just
You mean the little pedestrian?
the little pedestrian access.
It would be staired.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And that kind of just drops off right in the turn radius of that parking lot. I was wondering.
Yeah, it would, we'd probably end up trying to angle it off and do a nice little landing pad up there. It's in the works now. I haven't really completely graded it in yet, but.
Those details haven't been ironed out just yet. We know we need pedestrian access
Connections
from the
somehow there.
10-foot sidewalk into Aldi. We want that.
Yeah.
How that meanders up that 4-to-1 slope underneath that.
It's still being worked out. I would just like it not to just dump in the middle of the turn of that parking lot.
Understood.
Yeah.
Sure.
Yeah, I got you on that.
Yeah, yeah. And, you know, to speak, if I may, and I think I forgot to introduce myself, I'm Brad Howell with Advantage Civil Engineering. On the points brought up earlier about the other crosswalks, you know, those can be explored for sure, you know, to add additional crosswalks in particular other areas. And as far as, you know, it is a large site and there's a lot of trails, you know, that kind of meander up through by the creek and underneath the transmission lines. But we wanted to have that, you know, pedestrian entity, you know, to meander through this site. And, you know, I've talked with the owner, the developer about this. We want to put more of or when we get into the nitty gritty of designing this thing, is to create a wayfinding, you know, element to some of these trails with signage and stuff like that. That may help orient the user on which trail should I go down, you know, to get to the grocery store or building 1 to see my friend or however it may be.
Sure, yeah. I'm a big fan of the walking paths, the internal walking paths. It's more of the network of streets you have in there, that pedestrian circulation from Smoky Park Highway through the commercial into the residential is where I'm kind of seeing the problem. I think just some additional crosswalks may be helpful. And I mean, you can tell me if that's, or explain to me why that would be burdensome, but
No, I think we can explore
Okay.
that. We can definitely.
okay, so in North Carolina, any relative of someone who is buried in a cemetery has rights access that cemetery. Obviously, the cemetery is preserved. It has to be preserved, right? There's a lot of walls around there, and I noticed there's 2 walls kind of page top leftish, and there is the other slopes look too steep to kind of get up to the cemetery. But that one from that dispersal pad, can you tell me what the slope is between those 2 walls to spiral up to the cemetery?
I believe it's around 8 or 10%. Yep.
Okay.
We knew we had to make it, you know, minimal for maintenance and issues and stuff like that, and for people to go up there and
I mean, I like looking at old cemeteries.
And that's a cool one. Yeah, it is really neat.
Is it a cool one? Yeah.
It's really,
Yeah, dates to like 1840s.
Yeah.
yeah, very old.
Yeah, 10%, 8 to 10%. That's about the max we like to do to paths. Yeah.
Just to follow up on that, Jason, because, we'll have to boil this down to some kind of specific condition
Yeah.
on the crosswalks. Is
Yeah.
there some kind of language you would like to see included on those crosswalks? Like,
That's right.
I mean, you
specific
basically
language.
need a crosswalk everywhere where the sidewalk doesn't connect and, somebody's going to feel the desire to walk across that street. It's really not meant to be a throughway. And I think, a certain number of people might be inclined to want to drive those roads to go from point A to
Yeah.
point B. Because, I drove it today, admittedly, just through like the logging roads and popped out over by Home Depot. I was like, the guys were looking at me like, what are you doing here? But yeah, and I could see, I own a home over near this area, and I could see it being pretty convenient to move from Home Depot to Aldi to, the home I own is west of here in Candler. And so if I'm hitting Home Depot and then Aldi, and then I got to go grab the kids, and then I got to come back to Asheville, I doubt I'm going to exit Home Depot, back down to Smoky Park, come hit the light, turn in that way. Not to kind of air my own dirty laundry here, but I'm more inclined to drive directly through that development. So how do you see that language working in there? If you were
That's
to
a good
wanna
question.
include it?
I mean, I could draw them out, which ones I'd like to see. Specific language is kind of hard because it's not always where a sidewalk terminates per se. Like, okay, so for example, you're coming across the intersection where Road A goes back over to Buncombe County Sports Complex. So between Lot 2 and 3, and you're on the west side, and you want to get to Building A. How do I get to Building A?
Yeah, I can see that crosswalk needs to be right there.
Yeah, okay. And then, again, over by Aldi, I'm on the east side of the road, I guess it's still Road A, and I want to get to that natural surface path so I can get back to the buildings 4 and 5.
Noted. I can see that.
So at a minimum, those two.
Yep.
So is it really mostly focused on the two entry roads that kind of go north, and then each of those sidewalks is missing one crosswalk to connect up north across that east-west road?
I'd also like to see a third one, right? So on Road A, in the middle of parcel 2, or lot 2, I think there should be a crosswalk on both sides, because it looks like you have a break in the sidewalk for potential entry access, right? So I think there needs to be 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, I think there needs to be 6 crosswalks from the commercial side to the residential side.
And there's 3 shown, so 3 new.
Yeah, 3 new crosswalks.
Okay.
I think that makes sense as well.
Yeah, I can see this.
Okay. I mean,
Hey,
that's
Will,
really
can we
specific,
just-
so that, hopefully that's specific enough for language.
Yeah, can we just add those in as conditions for those?
Yeah.
And Curtis just told me he thinks they're on there, and we just can't see them.
Okay.
But there's no issue with adding those as a condition. Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
So some of them are on there as,
No, I'm looking at the detailed sheets. I'm looking at sheet C22, C23, I'm looking at all the site layout sheets.
If they're not on, we will add this.
Okay.
Yeah, we will add this.
Too. It's helpful.
Yeah, I see on Road A here, you gotta come down to Smoky Park if you wanna.
Yeah.
So,
Like, right there.
yeah, so Commissioner
Regular
Seigler
person's
suggesting
going
one
here, right there. Really both of those.
on the right side of the road.
Yeah, it's hard with that little turn.
Here.
whatever it is. Maybe there needs to be an island.
That's what
Suggesting
I'm-
one
like, I think
here.
like even on this road over here, it's,
Yeah.
like you said, it's very
And
pedestrian, or,
one
oriented.
here as well, so I think those are all the 3 there.
That's, adding this crosswalk is not a problem.
Okay.
Great.
I had a question for the designer. Another question, stormwater. Let's look at. Can we get pulled up C4?
You can scroll, you can use the touchpad at two
For
fingers.
everybody to see.
Scroll, and it's a touch screen too, if that's easier.
Let's see. Which one's C4? Let's see.
Go to the right, maybe, you can see what the title is.
Oh, yeah,
Your
yeah.
stormwater sheet 4. Yeah. That's it. So building, I guess it's building 5 up at the top right. There's a storm tech systems. I see the inlet into the isolator row, but I don't see an outlet. And I'm wondering where the stormwater is outletting there.
Well, the stormwater too is still relatively conceptual at this point.
Yeah.
You know what I mean, we haven't designed this with full calculus and stuff to this.
Of
At
course.
this point.
I'm just kind of curious in which direction it was outletting.
That should outlet to the east, it looks like. Yep.
Is he talking about that one right there?
The one right next to the bigger building, or the top one, or, yeah.
I'm sorry, I'm talking about the bigger building.
Yeah, so the one right to the east of that. Yeah, that should outlet somewhere to the east. Most likely through the wall that's there,
Okay.
unless it can be piped around it.
And then on stormwater, and I know you're working out more on stormwater. There's obviously a lot more detail, but you gave me enough to comment, so.
It's fair.
Sorry, as a stormwater designer. All right. So there is a lot of Road A that looks to be not, it just goes directly into the storm drain, and per calcs, that may be fine. You may be under the threshold. But I will say that it is, Hominy Creek is currently being slammed. That's a very flashy system. And I was wondering if there was a way for you guys to explore to see if you can capture more of that water before it dump, because that water in that storm drain ends up in the Hominy Creek, which is right on the other side of Smoky Park Highway. And that is a very flashy system. It's incised, it's getting hit hard. Anything we can do development-wise to make sure we don't make that worse.
Yeah, we can keep that in mind when we start sizing those systems, for sure.
It's more than just sizing the system, because right now none of those are going to a system. It doesn't look like. They're tied directly in, like some of those drains, like right off of the entry roads. Look to be going straight to the storm drain. It's at the bottom of the site, right? So it's hard to get them anywhere. I get that.
No, there was a system.
There will be a system.
Okay.
There'll be something.
Yeah, we've been messing with those two pads pretty frequently.
Awesome. Thank you. I believe that's all of my questions.
Any other questions from commissioners?
I guess just a comment. Thanks for your presentation. Overall, I think a lot of really great things here. As far as the grocery store being interior facing and not towards Smoky Park Highway, I think in this scenario, that totally makes sense. However, that is, not ultimately what this board and the city council is trying to push with those, wanting those buildings along the street. I just hope that when we do see plans for lots 2 and 3, I know this isn't including in that. If that's not taken into account in those designs, if I'm around, that'll be an issue for me. I don't know. Hopefully the rest of the board. I just feel like since that is the vision we're trying to push, we're gonna have to draw a line somewhere with doing that. But overall, I like what's going on with this project a lot.
Thank you.
And to that point, Lot 2 is being padded up with like a retaining wall along Smoky Park sidewalk. So the intention is really that that's being prepped for an internal facing as well, So that was going to be one of my questions is, do you need that retaining wall now on the south end of Lot 2, not knowing what that parcel will have?
Well, our goal is still to put the buildings, you know, whatever they may be, when that day comes on Lot 2 to front, you know, at least on Smoky Park Highway. Whether they have false facades on the front, you know, with sitting areas out on front, and then still the parking would be in the rear. That's still our goal.
So do you need the retaining wall along the sidewalk?
Just with all the topography, we needed to make it, you know, dare I say, a flat area, you know, just to get it prepped for, it's like a pad, if you will.
So the wall's either going to be on Smoky Park Highway or it's going to be on Internal Road A.
Exactly. Yeah. And then if it ends up on Internal Road A, we have an access issue basically getting to Lot 2, which is the other problem.
I guess, you know, my question is more, you're creating a flat development-ready pad, but if the intention is to bring a building out to Smoky Park, couldn't you just taper the grade and make it a, you know, future excavation for some type of building that could make up that difference? You know, rather than, it seems like if you're investing in the retaining wall now, it's going to stay and will front the internal street. But again, you know, if it's an important aspect of this project to make it a flat pad now, then it, you know, I'm okay accepting. I just kind of wanted to get what's driving
I think,
that.
like Dwight said, it has a lot to do with circulation and connectivity of an interior with all the other, you know, the roads and the sidewalks and stuff like that. So, it could, you know, is it an option we can look at? We could. We've looked at a lot of different options on this one.
I think, if I may reiterate what I think you're trying to say is that, I mean, if you don't know what the commercial entity is going into Lot 2, why invest in the wall now when there could be a creative option to make up the grade with the commercial development? You know, obviously your road is going up that grade.
I guess I should back up a little bit. That is definitely an option, depending on what kind of product, you know, presents itself for Lot 2. You know, this project will be before, you know, like the grocery store, that's going to be a phase 1.
Mm-hmm.
And then we'll move into the residential. You know, hopefully by that time we'll understand more like what Lot 2 is actually going to look like. And if it's, you know, a building that won't require the retaining wall, then we can, you know, tackle that when it presents itself.
Sure, I think the point is then, is the retaining wall part of phase 1?
No.
Okay.
Great.
Yeah, sorry. That's.
What we want to do is part of
I'm sorry?
we want to do is part of phase 1. We go on to
Well, I mean, yeah, all these will be phase 1, right?
Right.
Could you
Yeah,
step
sure.
up to the mic and introduce yourself, please?
Hello, I'm Curtis Williams. Thanks for the question. So part of the challenge on this site is you can see we have about 60 or 70 feet from the cemetery down to Smoky Park. So we're moving something like 600 million pounds of dirt. And part of that dirt is going to go on Lot 2 and Lot 3.
Okay, so
And
it's
so we're
filled.
picking it, that, correct.
Got it, you're looking
correct. So
for a
we're
balanced site.
We're balancing it, yeah.
Okay,
So,
thank you.
sorry for the, but
No, that's helpful.
thank you for your time.
I appreciate that. Thank you. I've got a kind of a detailed question. Along Road D, heading up towards Acton Woods Road, there's a couple of perpendicular spaces, parking space about 10. What's the purpose of those?
Okay, where are we looking again?
Along Road
North
D.
of the dog park.
Oh, okay.
Isn't that where the dog park's at?
I missed that note.
That's the dog park. Mm-hmm.
Gotcha, okay. It sort of brings up a question for me. Are any of these internal roads intended to become public roads? Are none of them being built to city standards?
They're built to city standards, but they'll remain private.
Okay, because that's something we don't allow perpendicular parking off of a public street, do we?
So just north of the clubhouse. I don't think typically.
I guess the more typical thing would be parallel parking if they're city streets, but if they're not going to ever be turned over, you know.
Well, I would move to make a condition, even if they are public, to allow for the perpendicular parking.
Yeah. It makes sense, yeah, to just access that amenity. It's a better way than.
I mean, I think it's not ideal right there on the curve, but I think it's a low volume road.
Yeah.
I think all the internal, like, parking lot and drive aisles wouldn't really be city streets, like Acton Woods connections, the road Ds, the new, alphabetically labeled roads are probably things built to city standards that the city could accept if they were asked to, but the internal parking lots, and that particular parking lot wouldn't meet the city standards, wouldn't be eligible for such.
One other question is the 2 proposed townhomes, top right, are those also planned to be for rental or?
To be determined, are they going to sell those? We don't know.
I just. Sure. Just gonna plug in here, affordable housing. I mean, we'd always love to see, if they are for sale, that 20% or that 80% AMI for 20 years, but I'm just plugging that in here because I think that's still a consideration this board needs to keep in the verbiage. But I don't think for this particular project I'm moved to push for anything.
Any other questions for the applicant before we open public comment? Hearing none, thank you.
Thank you.
We will open the public comment at 6:15. Would anybody like to speak on this item? Seeing none, we will close the public comment at 6:15. Any parting thoughts on this?
We're going to make changes to the conditions. We have to have it on the record that they're approved. I couldn't tell if some of them are just changes to revise the site plan, or if you do actually want to say, you know, have pedestrian crosswalks as you've described. And the other thing I didn't know, I know there were questions about the graveyard earlier. It's in the design plan. Is that enough, or do you want to call it out in the conditions to say the graveyard won't be disturbed in accordance with city ordinances and state law? I didn't know how important that was.
They can't do that anyway.
And we'd have to ask the applicant if they agree.
Yeah, just speaking for me personally, you know, that would be a condition, like comply with the law, and I don't see it as necessary. I think I was,
Okay.
if there's additional city requirements that this project hasn't been evaluated against, then I would hope that we do that
So
before
as long as
council.
it shows on the site plan, which it does.
Yeah.
And if it's okay with Mr. Cycle on the additional crosswalks, if we can just indicate that we will reflect those on the next iteration of the site plan, consistent with the minutes and the discussions, does that get us home instead of having to try to spell them out in the written conditions?
You mean between now and city council, or?
Or just we are agreeing to
Yeah.
those additional crosswalks, and we'll reflect them on the site plan and resubmit consistent with the comments tonight.
I think that'd either have to be on the site plan or in the project conditions that city council sees.
I think if it gets onto the site plan and we have in the conditions, which we do, that we'll be in substantial compliance with the site plan, that, you know, that gets us home. I was just trying to avoid adding additional written conditions, but I'm okay either way. We're agreeing to put the crosswalks in.
Whoever reads the motion could say to revise the site, it's approved, and revise the site plan to include the additional crosswalks as discussed. I mean, that's, rather than adding in, unless you wanted to add in something in the written conditions.
So I'm not a lawyer, right? So I just want to make sure that it's binding in some way, that those crosswalks will make it in there.
When the recommendation's read,
Okay.
we have it on our record, what's to be revised.
Yeah, I wasn't trying to overthink it anyway. And the other one was the technical modification on the perpendicular parking in that area by the dog park. And I think that goes in the technical mods section.
Is that a required technical modification, or is that just something that?
I don't know.
Okay.
I don't know.
Can't this be reflected on the site plan as well, to change them to?
I'm okay with that.
Okay.
It works both ways.
Well, but they're not proposing to change the site plan, they're proposing that we allow a modification to City of Asheville standards, right? Is that?
If it's a standard, I'm not sure if it is. I can think of a couple places where there's
Yeah.
perpendicular parking, but
No,
not
I
many.
don't think,
It's
yeah.
not unless it's going to be owned by us.
Okay.
Exactly. If it's going to be a city-owned street, it
But
cannot
if
be.
you wanted to see it anyway, like you could revise the site plan, say we'd rather see that. If
No, that's what,
update.
currently what exists is not allowed.
Oh, you like what currently exists?
But
I
acceptable.
don't mind
I mean-
it. I'm just letting them know if they want to see.
fine.
Okay.
It's fine.
Okay, okay.
It's probably not required if you're not planning to turn the,
Change it,
Yeah,
Streets
we
over to the
we
city.
can leave that one. That's fine. Okay.
I have a question with regard to lot 2 and 3 for staff. In the future development of those, will they be just required to meet commercial expansion and only trigger whatever threshold they hit at that time?
we would likely treat them as an amendment to this conditional zoning if it were approved. And that would require for them to come back to this body and city council.
But that's what it says in the conditions.
Essentially, no matter what's built there, within the next 3 years or whatever, it'd be considered part of the same development.
Because when you do approve a conditional zoning, it's exactly what you see, and obviously they haven't developed that yet. And so and I think they agree to that condition. They weren't able to give more specifics. I think if they could have come up with something like we did with Project Aspire, where you have this range of size between this and this, then it might not have to come through a whole CZ. But that is, a CZ is what you see is what you get, and it's not fully developed, so it would have to come back as an amendment.
It's an interesting question, and maybe it's kind of unique because we don't see a lot of projects that have sort of future lot phases, but have we ever done one where that it would be required to be an amendment unless they could meet all the standards of the underlying zoning district?
So basically, yes. I'm not sure anybody was on this board at the time, but with larger commercial centers and outlots, such as the Smoky Park Ingalls, which was a conditional zoning, the structure was set up for those outlots to come back through as level 2 reviews at the staff level and meet all requirements of the base zoning district and also anything else that had been included in the conditional zoning. So it's feasible, and this would all be going to commercial expansion, which does have its own set of requirements for, things that haven't been addressed yet, setbacks, parking location, building. Does it have building massing at all?
It requires buildings to be fronted on the primary corridor,
Yeah.
that the parking lots be in the rear, there's transparency window minimums.
So more than likely, it would come back as an amendment to a CZ, but I do think if we could provide some flexibility to
Yeah.
allow it to proceed, meeting the underlying zoning, that would be.
I'm gonna throw a flyer out there without even thinking through it that much, but kind of combining that thought and what the existing zoning is as HB. Do we want to put in an additional condition that allows HB uses only to go to staff level?
I think we could, with HB form as well, and it's probably something staff would advise.
Sorry, could you speak into the mic, Mr. Palmquist?
So I probably wouldn't, staff probably wouldn't be as much in support of the HB zoning, the highway business zoning form, since it allows for parking in the front and that sort of thing. Whereas the commercial expansion is a little more in line, I think, with the comprehensive plan and some of the other aspirations that Commissioner Fairclough was speaking to as well.
Nice try, Mr. Allen.
You're saying amend condition 4, which says future development phases, lot 2 and 3, will require an amendment to this adopted conditional zoning unless the design meets commercial expansion CZ requirements?
Well, or just regular commercial expansion.
Commercial
but
expansion requirements, then it can be a staff review.
I'd be in favor of that revision to project condition number 4.
One thing that I'm kind of thinking about here is Lot 2 and Lot 3, do those have to be conditionally rezoned now?
That's a discussion that we're going to have, because I just wrote that down after this hearing. For the purposes of this hearing, I think we leave that, but I'm not sure if we don't want to amend and take that out of the project. They're not going to be developed right now.
Yeah, I mean.
I just don't know what
I
the other, what the other impacts are of doing that.
Yeah, I just,
Well, but I think ultimately they are going to be developed. So I mean, we got to look at this as. I think taking it off right now isn't gonna. That wouldn't be something I would be ideal, or that I would be for.
I don't want to do that now, but it's an academic exercise that we're going to go through, yeah.
Okay.
I'll add, just for enrichment to this conversation, in the pre-meeting, we were discussing a clause that requires developments within 3 years by the same developer or landowner and 500 feet to be part of one development. And the way staff would apply that, this would all need to come together if it met those conditions, 3 years, 500 feet, so.
Correct. Agreed.
All right, so I think what we're headed towards is a motion that would allow for revision of the site plan to reflect addition of 3 crosswalks along the main entry drives, as well as a revision to condition number 4 to allow staff review and approval of lots 2 and 3 meeting commercial expansion district underlying zoning standards. Anything else before we entertain a motion?
Did you want to add that there was a traffic impact analysis conducted? I mean, I don't know if you want to call it out.
I think it's covered. Yeah.
Okay.
Would anybody like to attempt to make a motion?
I'll go for it. I move to approve the conditional zoning request for the property located at 172 Moody Avenue from highway business to residential multifamily low-density RM6 to commercial expansion conditional zone, and find that this request is reasonable, is in the public interest, is consistent with the city's comprehensive plan, and meets the development needs of the community, and that the request, 1, provides infill development in targeted growth areas, 2, increases the rental housing supply, 3, establishes accessible and well-connected commercial nodes consistent with strategies outlined in the plan's growth areas, and 4, eliminates gaps in the city's sidewalk network. Also with conditions of
Revising the plan
sidewalks based
on comment. Yeah.
comments, and that condition 4 is adjusted to allow commercial expansion to be staff review only
On lots 2
on
and
lots
3.
2 and 3. That.
So we have a motion. Do I have a second?
Second?
And that's if, the staff review only if it meets the condition, okay, yeah.
All right, we have a motion and a second. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion passes unanimously. Best of luck.
Thank you.
All right, next up, we have a request to rezone properties located at 28 Roberts Street from River Arts Forum District Neighborhood Transition, RAD-NT, to residential multifamily medium density, RM8. The properties are identified as pins, here we go again, 9638.
You can say as noted on the agenda. I think that's.
As noted on the agenda.
That's how Joe used to do it.
Oh,
Yeah,
my
I think we're
gosh.
good.
All the pins as noted on the agenda in the Buncombe County tax record. Property owners are Roberts Green LLC and Ricky and Vivian Brown. The applicant contact is Mr. Kevin Kerr. Planner coordinating review is Will Palmquist. Mr. Palmquist.
Thank you, Chair. Good evening again, Commissioners. This is a straight rezoning request for properties located at 28 Roberts Street. So this, as opposed to conditional zonings, would just be a request to change the underlying zoning from one district to another. You can see the 8 properties outlined here at the corners of Roberts Street, West Haywood Street, and Green Street. The properties total pretty much exactly 1.0 acres. You can see it's located within the River Arts District, kind of within the Weekend neighborhood, and between that and the actual riverfront itself. So the existing zoning is River Arts District Neighborhood Transition Zone, and the applicant is requesting a rezoning to the residential multifamily medium density RM8 zoning district. You can see the RM8 is to the east of the subject properties, and the RAD-NT exists to the west of it. The existing future land use, as shown in the comprehensive plan, is traditional neighborhood, and no change in that would be required for this rezoning. Without bearing the lead too much, I'll say that staff has some significant concerns with this requested rezoning. We do note that the one pro is that it would create, it would not create an inconsistency with the Weekend neighborhood zoning. The RM8 zoning that exists to the east of these properties would be compatible and would basically be the same zoning essentially. A couple of major cons of the rezoning that staff sees is that it would result in a reduction in the diversity of the allowed land uses, which could otherwise be more mixed-use development. And it would also remove the form code elements in the RAD-NT district, which promotes a more urban and walkable development pattern and is specifically tailored to this area of the River Arts District. So just a little background, I pulled these slides from that RAD rezoning that happened, 8 years ago now. So that rezoning was a 2-year process that had multiple phases, design charrettes, hiring of professional teams, various reviews and redrafting of it before the eventual approval in the summer of 2017. Obviously had a lot of community input and involvement to figure out and decide on the regulations and the geography of the rezoning. The rezoning itself is actually the culmination of really decades of work on the riverfront that started way back in, way back really in 1989 with the riverfront plan. Different milestones such as the River District, the Wilma-Dykeman Riverway Plan, the river, now the Asheville Buncombe Riverfront Commission, the RAD-TIP transportation and project that invested millions of dollars into that area to make the pedestrian network enhanced, as well as enhance vehicular connectivity, and eventually, finally, to implement a lot of the vision of that future area, the RAD form code was adopted. This map just shows that prior zoning and the proposed zoning. So you can see a lot of remnant property, remnant zoning of commercial industrial districts that are now more in line with the character of the existing RAD and the future character as seen 7+ years ago. So this slide just describes some of the land uses. As requested, there is a table of the exact land uses from the UDO in the materials folder. This seeks to summarize that a little bit more in detail. So the RM8 is really, it covers a large portion of the city. It's mostly a residential-based district, so it allows for things like single-family detached houses that the RAD-NT does not allow for, and allows for some larger scale residential like duplexes, townhomes, and some small scale multifamily, and some limited civic, recreational, institutional uses. Whereas the RAD-NT district allows for a variety of different land uses, does not allow for single-family detached, but allows for townhouses and multifamily, as well as other ADU upper story residential uses, different daycare, family care, civic uses, smaller scale residential and neighborhood-oriented businesses, offices, barbershops, cat cafes we talked about last year, retail, tailors, et cetera, et cetera. And then the RAD-NT also has a number of form code considerations that the RM8 just does not. You know, the RM8 is about 1 page in the UDO, and the RAD-NT is about 25 or 30. The RAD has different sub areas of it, the NT being one of them. So you'll see that there's no density or structure size limits in the RAD-NT versus the RM8. There's also no minimum setback required, and there's actually a maximum setback of 10 feet. So you cannot have your building more than 10 feet away from the property line, whereas the RM8 is a minimum 15-foot setback. Heights are relatively similar. The RAD-NT is a little more tailored to the location, being adjacent to RS/RM zoning. It would be 3 stories instead of 4, but there is actually a 2-story minimum to create more of an urban place and more of an urban presence. The parking is reduced, so it's 3/4 of a space per unit as opposed to the standard 1 per unit for units with 2 bedrooms and fewer. The bike parking is also substantially more than the standard zoning. It's actually half a bike parking space, which includes provisions for short-term and long-term bike parking, as opposed to the citywide standard of 5%. There's also requirements for elements such as a build-to zone, so meaning that a building has to occupy 70% of the area facing a street. Also, window requirements, so 20% for residential and 50% for the ground floor and 20% for upper stories for non-residential. And sidewalk requirements would be applied for projects in the RAD-NT, 8-foot wide along the primary street and 6-foot wide on any side streets, whereas the RM8 district defaults to the standard thresholds of only being triggered if there are 20 plus units proposed. This is pulled from the UDO itself, just describing the purpose of the different districts. So you can see, not to belabor the point, that the RAD-NT is meant to accommodate a variety of different land uses, mixed-use buildings to address and conform to the topography of the area, taking into consideration the nearby residential zonings. And the RM8 is meant to provide a range of residential uses between single-family and higher-density multifamily. The rezoning itself is compatible with the surrounding land uses generally, which includes the RM8, which is zoned to the east of the subject properties, and then the RAD-NT zoning districts to the west of the subject properties, as discussed earlier. This proposed rezoning partially supports a goal in the comprehensive plan to increase the supply of housing or encourage more housing, since it does change the zoning to a residentially based zoning district, although the amount of housing that could be built there is reduced. The comprehensive plan also has a number of goals that seek to create and prioritize form codes, design guidelines, similar zonings for properties that are transit supportive and achieve a transit supportive strategy. Also, contextual design that addresses the form of areas as identified in growth areas of the plan. So there are a few goals there specifically addressing form codes and design guidelines that this rezoning would not support. So the RM8 is cited as an appropriate zoning district within that traditional neighborhood future land use category. The proposed rezoning is partially compatible with that traditional neighborhood future land use, which is proposed in part as a diverse range of housing types at a cross-section, at a street pattern with cross-street forming blocks, as well as opportunities for infill housing in order to improve the supply and mix of housing options. So finally, for all those reasons, staff does not recommend approval of this proposed rezoning. I'd be glad to answer any questions. I believe the applicant is here this evening.
Thank you, Mr. Palmquist. And I should have, when teeing this one up for the public and my fellow commissioners, mentioned that as a straight rezoning request, we're here to weigh all the allowable uses within the sought-after zoning RM8. And so we're not here to kind of deliberate conditions or anything like that. It's a straight rezoning request.
I have a question for staff. If it's possible for you or Mr. Collins to shed any light on the history of why the RAD NT in this location kind of pops up into the neighborhood and then comes back down to Robert Street.
I can't speak personally to that. It was zoned RM8 prior to the RAD NT zoning of 2017. You are correct that the geography does slope up. Might just be a function of the roads and trying to draw them in a way that followed right-of-ways. So I guess everything to the west of here is RAD NT, and you can see it jog up Haywood and then down Green Street. That would be one reason to draw it in a way, since those properties are all clustered.
So I'll add to that. Just from my memory, it's been a few years. A few things have happened since the RAD rezoning. But the goal of a form district is to create an urban and transit supportive infrastructure along corridors, major corridors within the district, which Robert Street is. Also to frame out the corners, and there's a goal of placemaking as well as increasing that residential presence, that street frontage, and that urban corridor that supports the transit living as well. So whereas these parcels do contain Robert Street frontage and they do frame that corner at Roberts and West Haywood, the basics of a form code would dictate that that would be included.
Sorry, could you just repeat that? The Robert Street, you said, is a transit corridor or a pedestrian, primary pedestrian street?
I don't have the map in front of me right now. It is a corridor in the RAD district, right? Roberts comes on in, and I've got a static map up here, but
Roberts just kind of tees into West Haywood.
yeah,
Basically turns into West Haywood on a sharp left.
we go that way. But heading down the other way, Roberts does play a big role as we get down into the RAD.
Sure,
so
as you
by
get
extension.
further down, yeah.
But that's my answer academically on it. I don't have anything in front of me to show you exactly why those parcels were included. I didn't come across anything like that, I don't think.
Yeah, no, I can't
Will
say
did either.
specifically why, but I think all those points make sense.
So it was 2017 when this was changed to RAD?
Correct.
NT? I mean, I guess what I'm weighing in my mind is in those 7 years, I mean, we haven't seen someone go for that type of zoning in this lot. I understand that staff wants, the form-based code and the bigger picture goal here, but if we have someone wanting to work on this lot, I hate to landlock it off. If we waited another 7 years, would there be someone building to that NT code in there? It's kind of my question, putting out there to the other commissioners.
I mean, Roberts Street itself provides like a number of really complex issues in the sense that there's probably a 20-foot tall retaining wall just to the south of this site that, say a sidewalk was placed on this site along Robert Street, it would have no way to move south beyond that retaining wall. It would be like a 2-foot strip of concrete on Robert Street. So I don't know that there's any possibility to get a connected sidewalk on the east side of Robert Street all the way down to the River Arts District unless we were to, buy that property with a retaining wall and, put it there ourselves. There's also, I'm not sure there are any sidewalks on Robert Street. Are there any sidewalks on Robert Street outside of the hotel?
I can't speak definitively, but I don't believe there's any along this segment adjacent to the subject properties.
It's okay, I drove it multiple times, there's no sidewalks. I live near there, so, no property in Wecan, Chicken Hill, no residential area there has any sidewalk. There's actually a lie, there's one house on West Haywood Street, somehow mysteriously did get a sidewalk in front of it, and then on Robert Street, there's another house that got about 12 feet of sidewalk in front of it on an adjacent property. They appear to use it purely as a parking pad, on-street, extended on-street parking. So, yeah, I think that part of town has a long way to go to be a connected part of Asheville when it comes to that kind of infrastructure.
And I'll just say, sometimes this is how sidewalks get built in Asheville, and the cost of building them is onerous, and it would take the city a long time to build them everywhere that we would love to have them. Sometimes it's through private development, and this is only speculative what might happen at this property at this point under either zoning district. But just to state that, sometimes we have to rely on private development to provide that infrastructure. And, 7 years is not a short amount of time, given the scope of 35 years since the original riverfront plan and today, just trying to keep a broader perspective, which is what staff's trying to bring.
I have a really technical question, because these are 7, 8 lots if you count that weird pizza slice on the southeast corner there. On these 8 lots, what could somebody actually build on these 8 lots?
Under the current zoning?
Yeah, under RAD NT. There's 8 lots there.
Sure.
And they're all zoned RAD NT. So what
it's
could somebody do on one of those lots?
So it's an acre site total. Under the RAD NT, it could be townhomes, could be a smaller scale multifamily building, it could be a mixed use building, it could be.
So can we force them to recombine these plots into a full 1 acre site?
No.
Oh, we can't force them to do that?
Correct.
So there are 8 lots there in perpetuity as far as we can tell.
Sure, yes, that's the existing condition. Yep.
And we can't force them to sell all 7 or 8 lots at once.
Correct.
So I'm just trying to really figure this out, because when I looked at the use table, there were more residential opportunities in RM8 than there are in RAD NT, significantly more. Cottage development can happen there, duplexes can happen there, and so it appears these lots almost have, and I don't know how long the person's owned it, but it appears they're kind of cornered under RAD NT.
So if I could just interject, so staff has given a presentation, we don't believe it meets the furthers the comp plan, the request, but I'm not sure that staff can answer this line of questioning right now about what could potentially be built there, or whether or not anyone intends to sell their property is beyond staff's role of analysis here.
So did the property owner own this during the time when it got rezoned, the current property owner?
We can ask the applicant that, I don't know.
Okay, just one more quick question, because everyone knows I love building heights. And this is the illustrious form-based code building height. So say in some future world where this is recombined into a 1 acre site, the back street there, Green Street, is about 50 feet as far as I can tell, counting up the 5-foot contours. 50 feet difference in elevation between Green Street and Robert Street. So in this theoretical world where there's one building on one site, how tall can that building physically be above Robert Street or Green Street?
So it's adjacent to the RM zoning, which would limit it to
Three
stories or 45 feet.
Which I don't think 45 feet's in the code, but I think it's just 3 stories in the UDO. But does that mean it would be negative 20 feet below Green Street?
I think we based on the primary entrance of the building, which would probably be the lower the elevation. It is hard to speculate a little bit, but I can see where you're going. If you count from the bottom, then you have negative feet on the top side, which I don't think is how we'd apply it. And there's different provisions for slopes and that sort of thing. We can chew on that and get you a better answer if we can look at the code. I just can't really answer that off the top of my head at the moment, to be honest.
Yeah, just food for thought, because the adjacent properties, are significantly larger, and this NT is called out to be a neighborhood transition, and really it's essentially been rezoned into a commercial use inside of a neighborhood. So it's, because that neighborhood does exist and has existed for quite a while. And it's completely surrounded by single-family homes. So just a thought. I would like to hear from the applicant.
Yep. Before we do, I wanted to pick up on one comment that Mr. Collins made to attempt to refocus us back on staff's reasoning for recommending denial. And it was also in your presentation, Mr. Palmquist, that the applicant's request only partially complies with the future land use maps traditional neighborhood designation. I'd just like to hear a little bit more about why you believe it only partially complies with traditional neighborhood.
And this slide's a little contradictory because it's acknowledging that under the future land use section, the different land uses have a list of zoning districts that could be compatible under that future land use, and RM8 is cited as one of them. With that being said, the traditional neighborhood, and reading between the lines a little bit and trying to breathe some life into these land uses, thinking about things like mix of housing options, so things like the townhomes, small-scale multifamily, trying to think more about the intersecting street patterns and forming more blocks. It's maybe not as tailored to a specific site, but more the general character of the area, kind of zooming out a little bit, which the RAD-NT, I think, achieves on a larger, more conceptual scale in a way that the RM8 possibly would not as much.
I think, the crux of the question is really more what in traditional neighborhood, and I went back to the comp plan and read the section, is incompatible with RM8. And to pick up on Commissioner Wheatley's point, in the traditional neighborhood description, it says quite clearly commercial uses would be inappropriate in a traditional neighborhood with the exception of uses compatible within a residential context, including homestays, bed and breakfast inns, and appropriately designed neighborhood centers. And while I know we're not contemplating a specific RAD-NT proposal, it does strike me that the limitation back to residential uses is compatible with traditional neighborhood. So that's why I asked the question.
And I think it's kind of why we're describing it as partially compatible. We're not saying it's incompatible. Obviously, a lot of the zoning in the RM8 across the city aligns with traditional neighborhoods. That's that they overlap quite a bit. So they're not. It's not incompatible. It's correct about the traditional neighborhood, speaking about the limited kinds of commercial uses. I think the RAD-NT does that in some ways where the land uses are not as voluminous as the commercial districts in the zoning code. But as far as the kind of the vision as far as staff sees the traditional neighborhood, the rezoning is only partially compatible, but we're not saying it's completely incongruent, I guess, is maybe a better way of putting it.
Great, appreciate that.
And just following up there, I couldn't help but jump over to the comp plan too. I saw that the target density inside of a traditional neighborhood is 4 to 8 dwelling units per acre, which is, I think in the city we're only hitting about 3.5 in most areas. This is 7 lots on 1 acre. So in the, least dense application of RM8, being a detached single-family home, that's still 7 homes per acre, which if we did that all around the city, I think we'd have abundant housing all of a sudden. But when you look at the other uses in RM8, which includes duplex, which isn't allowed in RAD-NT, and also allows cottage development, I think, there's an opportunity there for potentially up to 16 dwelling units per acre underneath RM8. And that seems also really in line with the comp plan and the future land use. So,
why don't we hear from the applicant, unless, did you have one?
I'm anxious to hear from the applicant as well. I just did have one more staff question. The 240-26 malfunction junction area, I know that's in the process of being bid and redesigned. I mean, do we know, I haven't been privy to that new design, or I don't even know if it's out there, but does staff know, are we increasing accessibility to that corridor, decreasing? Like do we, I guess where I'm going at is that whole area is about to do some major overhaul.
Yes.
Is it going more toward residential or more toward commercial type businesses in that area of traffic flow? Do you see what I'm asking?
Yes. So obviously the I-26 connector project would split the highway between 240 east, heading this way, and then connecting more further north. Okay. And that would allow for the current I-240 across the Bowen Bridge to be, which is also Patton Avenue, to be more neighborhood street. There are some, conceptual connections that city staff has been investigating, working with NCDOT on, that could allow more connections from Patton Avenue to this RAD area. There are some challenges to that and some uncertainty about whether they're feasible or not. So on a conceptual level, there are ideas to better connect the neighborhood to Patton Avenue, which would be more of a, not a neighborhood street, it would still be more of it would still be maybe a couple lanes, but it would be much more reduced traffic flow and more of a smaller minor arterial than it is today.
Sure. So, I guess what I'm just thinking out loud is it seems like we're trying to alleviate some of that traffic there, which it seems like we're trying to go more toward residential in some of those areas. Just my thoughts.
Well, particularly West Haywood Street. I could barely squeeze my truck down it today. On-street parking happens continually on West Haywood Street, and then it's a very narrow road already. So it's essentially constricted to some kind of self-regulated one-way street. No flagger, no light or anything like that. And I'm not sure, there may, RAD-NT being a more commercial-facing land use opportunity for a developer, I'm not sure. I think this room would be full, to be really honest. with neighborhood opposition if there was a mixed-use development trying to be put on the corner of West Haywood Street, as West Haywood Street currently stands. It would be a huge, I think, infrastructure burden for that neighborhood.
Well, part of it is also that the RAD-NT was a public process and was rezoned with public hearings, and future development wouldn't necessarily have to be reviewed by the P&Z as long as it met the existing standards, but I see your point.
And I guess it's incumbent on me to mention that we did receive 2 public comments in advance for this item, both residents of Wecan neighborhoods supporting staff's position that the RAD-NT should remain, but point taken that, you know, a very intense development could elicit potentially more negative response. We just don't know.
Yeah, one of them was requesting sidewalks, and I think sidewalks are cool. It's a great opportunity. I think that neighborhood could use about 5 miles of sidewalks. And I don't know that the 60 feet there on Roberts could absorb that demand for walking.
Why don't we hear from the applicant? Thank you, Mr. Palmquist.
You're welcome. Thank you.
Good afternoon. I am Jesse Swords, attorney with Allen, Stoll & Kilbourne. Here representing the applicant, and I'm also here with Kyle from the applicant. And I think a lot of the points I was going to make, y'all have picked up on. I do have a couple of slides. Can I plug in?
Sure. Well, we don't usually want you to put a USB drive in the city computers for malicious software security type protocols.
Okay.
So I don't know. Can you email it to me?
I can't, because I don't.
Okay. Yeah, it's the bond. We see the presentations ahead of time. Do you know how again? Do you know like Chris?
Do you have them
Can you just
on like a
use-
Google
you can't
Drive
use
or
the
something you can share?
Information we have that we've already shared? No, we can't. We might have images or something.
You got a USB-C or just a USB?
USB-A.
Yeah.
It's okay.
Just,
Run a scan.
yeah, we'll put it on the ASK.
I have too many cybersecurity trainings lately. They drill it into our heads here at the city.
That'll lead to paranoia for sure. Just
Files, yeah. That'll just work. Yep.
so
Double click on the ones you want.
slides. It's just a PDF.
Should open up you can just kind of scroll through this. This is
Uh,
slideshow.
Can I get to full screen somehow? It's okay if I can't. So I just had this slide in here for context, as if we're not all very familiar with this piece of property. This is the Google Street View from the 240 bridge, and the property is right around here. I have another slide that this is from Buncombe County GIS showing City of Asheville zoning. I think it does a little bit better of a job of kind of showing how this RAD neighborhood transition juts into the existing neighborhood, which I think is, you know, something that y'all should consider. So the reason for this rezoning request is it was mentioned that this would reduce the number of land uses permissible on this piece of land, but it would in fact also increase the the types of residential uses that are available. So in the RAD zoning, single family not allowed, duplex not allowed. This is a residential developer looking to be able to have more options to develop this site. It is about, I think the number's 57 feet from bottom to top. Did I get that right? And it's flat down at the bottom, steep, and there are, there's some significant challenges to developing this, and it would be nice to have more housing types available to maximize what can be done with this site. I heard the comment about sidewalks, and, sidewalks may well be, desirable on Robert Street. But I got these other street view images of West Haywood along the property border, and you can see that the land kind of slopes down steeply from West Haywood there, and then kind of pivoting, that's Green Street. It climbs up very steeply. So sidewalks in those locations are, not only kind of technically difficult, but as was pointed out, it would really disrupt the neighborhood character. There are no sidewalks around. It would almost be like plopping down, kind of almost a suburban-looking, set of sidewalks in this context. And also, I wanted to mention, in the staff presentation, we saw there was a table of the form-based elements that would be lost. I did not see the buffer. I was reviewing it, and it looked like either a type A buffer is required, no matter what is built, whether it's residential or some other use, or there can be a wall plus a 10-foot buffer. And it doesn't matter if it's residential or, any other use allowed in the RAD. There would have to be buffers between the property and the adjacent RM8. And essentially this is, why would you treat a residential development, on this set of lots any different than, what is right next door? I went through the comprehensive plan and made some notes on goal number 1, which is encourage responsible growth. The staff report cited this as a does not support. But the counterpoint to that is prioritization of growth, in this case, means looking at goal number 13, which is increase and diversify housing supply, reducing administrative burdens to housing development and diversification. So we looked to that and let the property owner build the type of residential that makes sense for them in this property. That is encouraging responsible growth. Goal number 2, increase mixed use development along transit corridors. Again, this is a staff report citation for does not support. And the fact is, you can't really consider, the actual plans for this property as part of a straight rezoning, but, this property will be developed residential whether the underlying zoning supports mixed use or not. And the comment about, putting in a mixed use development here, drawing a lot of attention from the neighbors, I think is spot on. Goal number 3, promote great architecture and urban design to enhance placemaking. The staff report has this as a does not support, but the counterpoint to that is that the form-based code is also limiting. Compare the RAD form code to what is built all around this property. It is a really interesting, kind of amazing hodgepodge of styles and shapes. And that is, in my mind, this is one of the most characterful neighborhoods in Asheville, and you see it from the 240 bridge. Goal number 7 was not mentioned in the staff report, but it is celebrate the unique identity of neighborhoods through creative placemaking. And this one just highlights, single-family, detached, and duplexes are consistent with Weekend's unique neighborhood identity. And then finally, the staff report did have goal number 13, increase and diversify the housing supply, as a, does support element. Did I miss anything? I think that's my kind of positive presentation, and I can open it up for questions for me or Kyle.
Thank you, Mr. Swords. Any questions from commissioners for the applicant?
I think it was asked whether this was owned by the applicant when they rezoned it.
I don't know the answer to that.
Kyle Gilliland. It was, we bought it before the rezoning. Yeah.
So,
Were you a part of those discussions?
We weren't part of the discussions. We did meet with, I can't remember her name, started with a V. It was, who was it?
Vadilla?
Yeah, so she was we were trying to work with her because we were trying to keep it as RM8. And, and then it just passed very.
It was probably Sasha. Right?
Sasha, that's it.
Yeah.
I'm sorry, yeah, that's who it was, it's Sasha.
Vertinsky,
Yeah.
yeah.
Okay, that's where.
You got the V part.
Yeah, she did a lot of
Yeah, so we met with her a couple times and, I think it was just kind of got passed, so.
Great, thank you.
So, seeing that this is still for the applicant, so seeing that the property was zoned RM8 at the time of purchase or ownership prior to this rezoning, do you think there's any claim to be made that there's a vested right as RM8?
Not as far as I know. Vested rights are usually related to applications that have been submitted and, projects that have actually been worked on.
I'm going to interrupt Derek here. It's funny because I just wrote that question down, and vested rights, big V, big R, vested rights are one thing, valid non-conforming uses are another, and people call those vested rights all the time. I'm very interested to know if there are valid non-conforming rights that go with the lot itself, because the lot would be the non-conformity. So I don't know the answer to that, but I think that's more the question as opposed to, the true vested rights with the big R, big V, big R.
Yeah, it's interesting because I'm wondering what those 7 lots could be used for. Anyone might be envisioning using one of those individual lots for.
It certainly poses a challenge, how do those lot lines interact with, all the different form-based maximum, minimum setbacks. There's also, the buffer requirement, all these things combine, I think, to make it very difficult to actually design something.
Well, just looking at that southern lot there, for instance, I don't know its width, but it would require a 10-foot buffer from the adjacent RM zoning. And then the building itself would also then only be allowed to be 10 feet back from Robert Street. But it would also require parking at 0.75 spots per whatever that we were just described on the table. And I don't know if you could fit a driveway between a house that's only 10 feet away from the street to provide the on-site parking that's required in this. And it begs the question, because right now, when I looked up these parcels on GIS earlier, they're valued at around $110,000 per lot. However, if you can't build on a lot, if there's no buildable use for a lot, I'm not sure it's worth 110 grand. And so there is a question about, was a value taken from that property when it was moved from RM8 to, I just don't know. It's a Lego set that I haven't played with, but if you can't build on it, it's hard to have a value.
I like the analogy of the Lego set. Yeah, and I think, the reason for this rezoning request is that RM8 does provide more options. Whether, there are recombinations or changing lot lines involved in that as well, I don't know, but RM8 has more options for this site.
It seems obvious that if it gets rezoned, it would be single-family homes. I can't see anything else going there.
That remains to be seen. There are other options. RM8 allows more housing types, but mostly the same housing types, I think, off the top of my head, as the RAD. So it could be a combination of single-family, duplexes, townhomes, everything that code allows.
Well, now seems like a good time to open public comment unless there's other questions for the applicant. So at 7:13, we'll open public comment. Would anybody like to speak on this issue? Please approach the mic, state your name. You have 3 minutes.
Thank you. I'm Scott Adams. I work for a local home builder, but I have no financial interest or ownership or anything like that in the site. Just a quick observation, the 2 parcels on the upper right both have 15-foot private sewer easements on them. So that's another potential constraining factor, and it's just kind of a quick soapbox item of oftentimes when you're looking at lots, especially in the city, in small urban, weird infill situations, infrastructure is also very much a driver of what you can and cannot build, or the feasibility of what you can and cannot build. And just generally speaking to the kind of the side-by-side comparison of RM8 versus RAD-NT, yeah, it's very much true. The diversity of housing types that are allowed as permitted uses in RM8 is categorically more. So just a quick comment on that. Thank you.
Thank you. Any other member of the public wish to speak on this item? Seeing no one, we will close the public comment at 7:14. Any other comments, questions from commissioners? So in the staff report, staff has prepared 2 potential motions, a suggested motion to approve or a suggested motion to deny, which would concur with the staff recommendation. I'll say for me, you know, the request to rezone to RM8 seems sensible. Seems like the current zoning is an impediment to building housing, which our city desperately needs. So I would certainly entertain either motion, but I'd be supportive of a motion to approve.
Just want to note that I don't think the motion to approve is fully written with reasons to support. So if that's the motion, you'd want to add some of the reasons that we would normally have.
It does
Like
have
the
a
comprehensive plan.
It has one consistency statement.
One consistency, yeah. But the applicant did present alternative
some
ways
more.
to say how it did meet some of the standards. It's just up to you.
I just want to say first, I appreciate staff's reasoning for, you know, wanting the consistency with the RAD-NT. I do appreciate that. I also agree. This feels to me like a part of that neighborhood. And just as I walk the street, Roberts Street, in that particular section, it feels to me, my personal opinion as a designer, that it would be highly infeasible to be able to do sidewalks connectively all the way down to the traffic circle.
Yeah, I'd like to just kind of reiterate that, what Jason's position is, which is, you know, the River Arts District, form-based district, obviously took into account a lot of public input. And part of what this board is charged with is specific isolated instances of variance. And I think that's, you know, when we look at this site, we have to take into account the public benefit or the public harm as zoning requires. And there appears to be no quantifiable, you know, public detriment by not allowing a rezoning to RM8. And there are many unique site-specific constraints to this site that appear to make it less applicable to the RAD-NT zoning. And so I don't think, you know, whatever motion's made or however this moves, that is opposed to the River Arts form-based district in general.
Exactly.
But this may function as a specific anomaly or potential oversight in that process, which can happen when so much land is being reviewed on such a broad scale and over multiple years. So I really do appreciate staff's diligence reviewing it and, you know, trying to comply with that robust effort that was rolled out over the last couple of years and honor it.
All right, I'm ready to make a motion. I move to approve the zoning request for the properties located at 28 Robert Street from River Arts Form District Neighborhood Transition, RAD-NT to residential multifamily medium density RM8, and find that the request is reasonable, is in the public interest, is consistent with the city's comprehensive plan, and meets the development needs of the community. In that request, one, to promote zoning policies to encourage more housing and whatever else you want to add to that. Ms. Ashley?
It also matches the future land use map of traditional neighborhood, as well as matching the existing character of the Weekend neighborhood in Chicken Hill.
Do you accept those?
Yes,
additions
as
to the
amended.
motion? Do I have a second? I'll make the second. All those in favor, say aye. Aye. Any opposed? The motion passes unanimously. Are you all open to a brief recess? Okay, we'll take a 5-minute recess. We'll be back at 7:24. Thank you.
I think the applicant's drive is still in there.
Oh, yeah.
Chapter 7 of the UDO to revise the Level 2 site plan review and Level 3 development review processes. Planner Coordinating Review, Chris Collins. Mr. Collins.
All right, thank you. Good evening, Commissioners. Chris Collins with the Planning and Urban Design Department. As you kind of alluded to, and just to add to it, the next two text amendments you're going to see, you have already voted on the idea of, but we did want to bring the final wording before you, just for a final recommendation before it moves forward in the process. So the first one we'll look at is regarding project development review level thresholds. And this all happens in section 759 of the UDO. So a brief outline, there are level 1 projects, level 2 projects, and level 3 projects when it comes to site plan review for developments. Level 1 projects are administered by staff, reviewed ministerially. Level 2 projects are reviewed ministerially by staff, but take the extra step of having a technical review committee that's composed of multiple disciplines throughout the city and even outside of the city to verify compliance with requirements. Level 3 projects are all required to apply for conditional zoning, so therefore they come before the Planning and Zoning Commission and then eventually City Council for final action. I know this group's very familiar with those projects. So. And it's been identified, I'll breeze through these. You all have identified a lot of this. Level 3 projects do incur unpredictability, expense, and time for development. For what is relatively now, we're seeing multifamily projects, anything over 50 units having to go through that process. All right. So the proposed amendments were initially brought forward at the ask of the Planning and Zoning Commission to raise these thresholds and change the nature of them. And what was voted on previously and discussed at a work session that was held with Planning and Zoning Commission is what's going to be in front of you tonight. So here's an overview of what we're looking at right now. So for level 2 developments, the threshold would change for residential from the current 20 to 49 units for a level 2 to 35,000 square feet gross floor area to 99,999 square feet gross floor area. Single-family detached units would remain at 20 to 49 single-family units. So that is only individual detached homes, even something down to a duplex or townhome would fall under the square footage threshold rather than the unit threshold. Mixed use, which would be up to 80% residential, does get an additional allowance, can go up to 149,999 square feet for a level 2. No changes proposed to actually commercial, office, and institutional would remain where they are, 35,000 to 99. I have the hardest time saying all those nines, y'all. I don't know why. To just under 100,000 square feet. How about that? And industrial would remain unchanged as well as it is in the code right now. Level 3, the big change would be a residential project to be a level 3. Right now it is 50 units or more across the board. That would move to anything 100,000 square feet or greater for all residential types except single-family detached dwellings, which would retain that 50-plus square foot, 50-plus single-family detached unit designation. No changes through to the mixed-use commercial, office, institutional, and industrial thresholds. So you do still incur that bonus for being a mixed-use project that is predominantly residential and being able to be a by right approval. A couple of other things coming in here that are kind of housing supportive by making small business easier to work with and promoting ancillary commercial development in our neighborhoods and also directly residential. The first thing, we'd be raising the threshold for needing even a level 1 site plan review from 2 dwelling units to 4 or more. So you'd have to be proposing 5 residential units in a building before you had to even enter the level 1 staff site plan review. Everything does get reviewed, but it's a very fast informal review when it's not quite hitting that level 1. We'll be moving additions for commercial or any buildings with a gross floor area of 1,500 square feet or more So that's coming up from 500 that would require that level 1 site plan review. And again, that doesn't include residential projects containing not more than 4 dwelling units as shown in the line above. Removing a requirement that additions that displace existing parking go through the level 1 site plan review process. Removing the requirement that additions that generate the need for more parking go through that level 1 site plan review process. And where is the, sorry guys, there, okay, so actually it's a little bit of roundabout, so we're getting to the vacancy provision that you know about, but it just comes in a different section. Major subdivisions, compliance, we're moving that to 5 lots or greater from 8, as discussed. And we're removing a provision where an existing paved vehicular use area where 50% or more demolished is repaved has to bring the entire parking lot into compliance. That's been very problematic for staff and applicants in the past. Now, right here where you see new development crossed out, that's actually where we strike the provision that requires properties that have been vacant for more than 2 years to bring the site into full compliance. So that falls in a different section, but that does have that impact. And then we just went and struck that all new development definition from other sections as well. And that's that new development vacancy provision. All right, so the pros, as you voted on this before, it does create a higher allowance for entitled residential development, which will reduce review time and uncertainty for projects that otherwise would have a required conditional zoning. We do have often seen people back projects down to 49 units to stay out of that entitlement process. So there definitely is an incentive there to stay out of it, as we've seen with the hotel overlay, correct? So may promote the development of more dwelling units, possibly more attainable dwelling units by size by shifting to the square footage rather than unit threshold. And that's both those. Just to mention any cons, we do see at staff, just heads up on these. We do have many zoning districts within the city that have not been amended to promote a plan or a pattern of development that's consistent with our comprehensive plan. This would enable some development of those sites by right. Just putting it out there. And it does not directly provide an incentive for the inclusion of affordable housing units, which we've gone back and forth on with staff, but just stating that one. And you are the body that has voted on this previously, but what you have before you is the final language on this right now. Does support the Living Asheville comprehensive goals of encouraging responsible growth and increasing and diversifying the housing supply. And staff does recommend approval of the zoning text amendment.
Thank you, Mr. Collins, for the great overview, and really appreciate staff's work to get into the weeds on these thresholds and not just make sort of what started with us as a very simple recommendation. I think where we've arrived at is really robust, very thoughtful, and I'd say I agree with 99.999% of it. The one change that had been contemplated in some prior discussions that hasn't made it into the final draft is under the level 1 site plan review process. What is being proposed leaves in changes of use as a trigger that would trigger the level 1 site plan review process. And I think that there's several instances where that becomes a barrier to small businesses and small projects that could otherwise re-energize existing building stock in our community. So I would propose that we adopt this, but strike that provision, the change of use in the level 1. Any other comments or thoughts from commissioners, questions?
Obviously, as we voted 6-0 before on this language, I just wanted to go on the record again saying that this is a very exciting time to reduce barriers to much needed housing development. And I think this is a big moment. I'm very excited about this, and I'm also in support of striking F, changes of use from the level 1.
Yeah, thanks again to staff. This has been a really cool project. It's been awesome to coordinate in a way that, I understand I'm new to the board, but even the most seasoned people on this board haven't seen working groups come together and really focus on a collaborative effort. And so it's been a really appreciated process, and hopefully council sees that as a true sign of strength and a clear vision for what the city needs as it relates to both housing and small business.
I haven't read this, but are you going to amend 759.1, which is giving this body the right to review level 2s when they're in the CBD, and it mirrors all the same, in the CBD, it mirrors all the same square footages. So it just might be something that you just didn't catch up with. But
So if I'm, unless I'm really mistaken, 7591 in CBD already has a 100,000 square foot floor area threshold.
Level 2 comes here to planning and zoning.
Well, we haven't discussed that. That had never come up as to whether or not the planning,
Well, let me see.
yeah.
I figure it probably, 7.5.1 probably goes through 1, 2. It's not just 2, is it, level 2? It's just a catch. You'll probably clean it up to match it, but I just think I should have noticed it. It's the one place where it comes to planning and zoning for a level
For
2,
two.
whereas before,
Right.
it never, even
remember that.
as it was written, if it's not in the CBD, level 2 just always stayed with technical review. But years ago, council and this body decided that people, even though it was technical review, that the public wanted to have a say, even though they could yell at you and say, but I want you to not turn it down for this, and then planning and zoning was in the difficult position of saying, well, give me a technical reason why you don't like it. So I can catch it, and we'll just make it consistent.
It's an interesting conversation I'm willing to entertain right now. Just in, kind of working through this question of why does our downtown core maybe not get the same number of housing units coming into it. It could be that level 2 review through our board is a concern, and staff has shown to be more than capable, obviously, throughout the rest of the city reviewing level 2 through the TRC process. I have no real concern with relinquishing any of that burden, and would really be interested to hear what other commissioners have to say.
Yeah, I feel the same way, whatever can simplify the process. But I guess I'm looking at that section, the process would go technical review committee and then downtown commission and then back to final TRC if we eliminated the planning. So there would be like a downtown commission step, or are you proposing?
Yeah, I don't.
Would be design review committee, and how was it worded
If it
now?
says downtown, it would just have to be an ordinance change that they'd have to approve as well. But it sounds like we'll have to bring this one back to you, but I guess it's good to start the conversation. So it sounds like you're saying you don't think it should need to come to planning and zoning commission. You would maybe say not go to downtown commission, but that's kind of going to
Correct. Correct. I think starting it there is a good place to be. Feeling out how they feel about removing that requirement. Particularly, I have my own concern with housing being put through some of these design requirements, being centrally located downtown, where housing is really, if we can deliver it to downtown, is the most equitable geography in the city, is to have it downtown where it can be good access to jobs, good access to education, good access to transit. Having a lack of housing downtown is right now, being bore out by the lowest income earners in our city. You know, a car costs around $800 to $1,000 a month to operate, between fuel, taxes, insurance, maintenance. And so as we see housing continue to develop around the periphery, I'm not sure that that downtown design review, particularly to housing, is that contribution and our contribution here too as a board outweighs the public good of delivering housing to our residents.
One thing, you know, just kind of on the fly looking at that section, and I'm trying to figure out, would hotel overlay level 2 still come here, or if we...
That's in a different section,
Yeah.
right? And it would come, they do come, well, yeah, they do come, because that's why you asked for the public benefits, just
Well-
to say what the proposal was.
I think it's all driven by the level 2 downtown.
Yeah.
That's the only reason you're seeing hotels, because we have level 1 hotels, a couple that have utilized the overlay, and they don't, you don't see those. So, yeah, that is of note. That
Like
would,
Long Shoals had a hotel come through recently. We didn't review that.
right,
Okay.
exactly,
So,
yeah.
yeah, I mean, that's the other part of the conversation, and I don't know if the square footages are the same, and I don't think it calls out office and things, but we can try to make it consistent, and then with what's being proposed here.
The only place I see is level 2. We did miss, we would need to bump up the level 2 what becomes a level 2 downtown to 35,000 square feet to match what we're proposing outside of downtown. Now the question about whether level 2s come to you, that's if this commission's ready to make a motion on that, then
conversation.
we'll
Yeah.
act. But
So if we approve this and send that message to the downtown commission, isn't that kind of what we're doing? And they can clean that up,
City
because it has to go
council or
through.
downtown?
Well, you can't hear that not 759.1 now, because it's not in here.
yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
So it's just sort of direction to staff to come up with something similar to this and then take it through the process. So it sounds like you're saying, try to cut both downtown review, design review, cut out the hotel part, and then make the thresholds the same as what you're proposing now.
But
I think particularly as it regards to housing, I'm sure, you know, I would just say to keep it simple and stay focused on what we've done a lot of really great work on. Let's maybe pair that conversation, put it to the side. If you know, one of us wants to go speak to the downtown commission, we can. Even just maybe our chair could give their chair a call, have an informal conversation, something like that for the time being. But what we've put forward right here is really deep and meaningful work, really good for the
Yeah, we
community.
can move forward with this. I'm just saying, you know, things,
Yeah.
once you work on one, then it'll be like, oh, what, we thought we fixed this, and you'll have a level 2 coming before you for a CBD, because.
Well, I think
yeah,
it's a really cool
get it.
conversation because like HB, right? I look at the HB zoning district and I have very few complaints about it outside of the fact that the setbacks are 35 feet, you know, and I think a few small tweaks inside of some of those zoning districts will really quickly bring them into line with some of these forms we're looking for in our community.
So, hearing all this, it feels like there's, you know, some work to be done on the section 759.1, but we're sending an indication that we'd be open to removing ourselves from the level 2 process in downtown. But for now, what we're looking at is just reviewing what's presented, the text that's presented.
Correct. And the inclusion of removing paragraph F, changes of use.
So, ready to open public comment? We'll open public comment at 7:47. Would anybody like to speak on this? Please approach the mic.
Hi again, Scott Adams. So I just have a quick comment on the sidewalk standards, and this is more of just a general comment. So right now, the threshold for 19 single-family homes, no sidewalk required. 9 multifamily homes, no sidewalks required. So that right there seems to be sort of a double standard. So it's just a quick, larger conversational question if we're having conversations about equalizing that, homes to homes, regardless of the type. Just a follow-on comment on that, just looking at the existing requirements under 711.8, that's sidewalk requirements in the UDO, and then section 3H.03, sidewalk requirements on existing streets. That's in standard specifications and design manual. The basic issue with our city and a lot of development that's going on is you'll get 1 and 2 and 3, maybe 5, maybe 19 home developments on a lot of our existing streets, and under these thresholds, we're not getting any sidewalks built by developers. So I guess I would just, bring up the overall issue of our standards as they're written right now may not actually be contextualized to the development pattern that we're seeing, especially in a lot of infill neighborhoods. I'd say that as someone that worked with a home builder to build my house in West Asheville, if you're on Fairfax Avenue and you see a crazy set of garden beds up front, blue house, that's me. I was one of 3 houses where if we had some lower threshold or some other middle ground to do sidewalks, even on an existing street for just 3 homes, that would have been 200 feet of sidewalk frontage. And I live on a street that has random chunks of orphan sidewalks walking uphill to Haywood Road. So even though it's not a complete, robust sidewalk network, when someone's driving along, it's better to have at least a few 100 feet or a nominal place to step out of traffic for that. So just a general comment on the thresholds that we're discussing here. Thank you.
And so your comment, if I'm to make it more succinct, is lower thresholds.
Potentially, yes.
Potentially, and maybe more in line between 1 and 2, single family and multifamily for
Potentially, and
reasons.
I know there's also the, very sort of long-winded section on fee and lieu, but
Yeah.
just looking for a more robust way to get more incremental sidewalk development,
Sure.
even if it's not large, complete networks for large-scale multifamily or large-scale single-family subdivisions, which increasingly we don't have throughout
Right.
the city. It's more one-offs, so,
Thank you.
thank you.
Any other members of the public? Please approach.
Hey, y'all. Marty Benson. I'm not going to lobby too hard because I think this is going to go the right way. I work with the Strong Towns group in town a good bit, and I'm very much in favor of sort of taking the shackles off of housing in town. For the last couple of years, I've poured beer at New Belgium, and a lot of the people that I work with making a living wage can't live in the city limits of Asheville. And there are a lot of reasons for that: unnecessary setbacks, too much single family detached zoning. And so increasing the amount of, or the number of units that can be created in any given plot of land is good. This achieves a lot of that, and so I'm in favor of it. Thanks.
Thank you. Seeing no other prospective members of the public to comment, I will close the public comment at 7:51. Any other comments from the commission? Staff have any thoughts on the sidewalk comment?
I just got a reminder from some coworkers of ours that there are sidewalk section updates likely coming with the housing amendments that are going to be following up the missing middle housing study. The study, yeah.
Yeah, I can just say I've also heard, I think Nancy in particular is super passionate about sidewalk development and how that integrates with some of the single-family home patterns we've seen. And she's mentioned in passing some really exciting amendments they look to bring forward. So I think staff's working diligently on it. And, if it's one we don't attack specifically in this moment, it's probably pretty quick to follow its staff's direction.
Is what's coming, would it touch the 711.8 triggers or just the standards?
I can tell you generally that it would touch the standards, but the the reason I contemplated before answering this is because in our UDO, the triggers and the standards are a little mixed up on sidewalks, and they appear in multiple locations. But in general, it would touch both concepts and probably bring sidewalks to more types of development.
Gotcha. Any other questions, comments, or a motion?
I would like to move to approve the proposed wording amendment to Chapter 7 of the Asheville Code of Ordinances and find that the proposed amendments are reasonable and are in the public interest, are consistent with the city's comprehensive plan, and meet the development needs of the community, and that the amendments will simplify the Unified Development Ordinance and allows for a broader range of allowable densities and compatible housing options, and reduces administrative barriers to housing developments and diversification.
Second.
Are we adding the change of use, elimination?
With the amendment
Yes.
recommended of the removal of paragraph F, changes of use.
Second.
All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion passes unanimously. All right. Our final item on the agenda is a request to consider a proposed zoning text amendment to Chapter 7 of the UDO to revise residential parking requirements, planner coordinating review. Chris Collins. Mr. Collins.
All right, good evening, Chris Collins again. This one's a little less meaty, so this should take a little less time to get through. But this is, again, one that the group voted on the general concept of, and we are bringing a couple of considerations in the final wording back in front of the commission for a vote and recommendation. So we're looking at residential parking requirements. Right now, the UDO does require minimum parking standards for certain uses within the city, but does eliminate off-street parking requirements for residential developments within 1 mile of the CBD district when on-street parking is permitted on the streets on which development is proposed, and the developer investigates with the Asheville Transit Authority the provision of a transit stop to serve the development. So that is where we stand right now on the residential parking reduction. What has been proposed by this group and staff has taken back to write up here is to change that to expand the exempted areas to include those with 1/4 mile of a transit supportive corridor as identified in the comprehensive plan, and also areas within 1/2 mile of a transit stop. And that would also remove the requirement that on-street parking be permitted on the street where the development's proposed, and the requirement that they investigate having a transit stop installed. Going to show you a couple of things about what kind of coverage this looks like and stuff in the city here in a minute. And the comp plan definition defines the preferred growth area as within 1/2 mile of the transit supportive centers, and 1/4 mile along transit routes. So that kind of matches up with what you're proposing here, what's in the comp plan. All right, this map right here shows you transit routes and stops. It's big, there's a lot, you can't really see it in detail, but just that's our starting point. Now we're going to go through and add a 1/4 mile buffer around the transit lines, as the proposal does. And we're going to add to that a 1/2 mile buffer around transit stops. I just want to make it clear to the commission that at this point covers 81.2% of the land in the city limits. All right. Just so that's known. Tying it to the transit, and you're leaving out a very small amount, but it is going to tie into one of the cons I'm going to give you on this. The pros here, it does reduce parking requirements for residential projects near transit, but really almost all over the city, and thereby reduces the barriers to new housing development. Allows for more efficient site utilization with less land dedicated to parking. Potentially reduces the cost of housing for residents with reduced overall project costs. So just to take you through the cons again, what we see as staff to give you a heads up on, transit service is infrequent in many parts of the city, and there are long wait times, and there's some room for improvement. Some city streets are not supportive of on-street parking, so if a developer chooses not to provide parking, there could be some neighborhood impacts to consider. The third con, I want to mention two things, right? There are some potential administrative burdens to staff on working with these small pockets of areas that still require parking. But beyond staff, there are potential burdens to builders and developers on identifying when they do and don't have to provide parking for these developments. So since this is likely to produce a confusing process for development applicants and staff, we just are putting it out there in this presentation that you might consider extending the residential parking exemption citywide rather than just within those buffers and distances from stops. All right, so this has been voted on by this commission and also has made an appearance with, as referenced by Commissioner Wheatley previously, an appearance before the Multimodal Transportation Committee where support was voiced and this similar presentation was given. Does promote the Living Asheville Comprehensive Plan goals of encouraging responsible growth, increasing mixed-use development along transit corridors, and increasing and diversifying the housing supply. And staff does recommend approval of this zoning text amendment. Take any questions?
Thank you, Mr. Collins. Hypothetical question, if this body were to support tonight that the residential parking minimum be eliminated citywide, would staff be prepared to take that forward to council, or would you need to come back again to show us the text?
If that was your vote, the nature of the amendment would change a little. It would change to striking the section we're working with now and making a change to the parking requirements table to remove residential minimums. So I don't think that would, as long as it met the spirit of your motion, I'm looking at Janice for confirmation, I don't think we would have to bring it back to you because I have a pretty clear roadmap of how we get there. So.
How detailed was it advertised? I mean, did it say this is what we're doing?
There's a good question. Will, how to
revise residential
you're
parking?
expanding it instead of, and I don't know, it would probably just take one more meeting.
Yeah.
Where you could say,
If
or
we-
you
yeah.
could go up with a recommendation to council that they also consider making it citywide, and then when it gets advertised for the city council, it can be this or potentially this expanded. And then you could get it passed tonight. Does that make
So,
sense?
That is revising.
Yeah, but somebody could say, well, I read this, I read the proposal and I didn't see the whole city, I saw a quarter. I'm saying you
Yeah.
can move ahead, but if you want to go in that direction, you would also recommend that you.
What if we did two separate motions? One that would be the text on the table, and then a second motion that if, that it be citywide, is that making it more confusing, or?
I don't know why you have to do two.
Yeah.
While we're entertaining this, I obviously, if you recall last meeting that we reviewed this, I was very much in support of removing minimums citywide, but not just for residential, all minimums. And so I'm just trying to understand how everyone feels on that, and maybe what staff feels about removing all minimums. Why are we stuck on just residential minimums?
I can speak for just kind of how this was generated. I think it was a text amendment really just to bring the UDO in alignment with the comp plan and also to facilitate more housing development. Not to say that it does open up the question. I think is a really good question of, is there a relevance to parking minimums?
I just, we've looked at the central business district that doesn't have minimums and they're still providing parking. I think it's a market-driven thing. And so I don't know why we need an artificial floor.
I can tell you from the staff side on that, we would have to bring that back to you.
Of course.
There's a little
That's
more,
why I was
a little
bringing
more
it up
work
during
that
that
would need to go
discussion.
behind that one. But yeah, that's really my only comment. There is a little more work, and we would need to bring back a new agenda item.
So a couple of things that spring to mind. One, the advertisement is about modifying the parking minimums, which I think meets the requirement for the advertisement. Two, like Jason pointed out, we had a really robust discussion about removing all residential parking minimums the last time this came through. So there's been that open dialogue with the community. We also received pretty significant positive public input on removing the parking minimum from residential requirements in the first hearing of this issue. So as it relates to residential parking, whether we were to go down the line of transit corridors or citywide, it seems like this board, others in the community that are supportive of the UDO and the comp plan are well aware that these parking minimums are being discussed. So if it were just to be residential parking minimums, it would be really hard for me to understand why it would need to come back here. I don't really understand why it would have to come back here. That being said, if we were talking about removing all parking minimums, I think removing the residential parking minimums may be a good opportunity for council to go ahead and provide their feedback as to how they feel about moving away from all parking minimums. Obviously, if they can't support removing residential parking minimums, they'll probably have a difficult time supporting removing all parking minimums. So,
I'd be comfortable with a motion that's expansive citywide if my fellow commissioners are eager to make that. And we can potentially just try to make it broad enough to delegate the authority to staff to make the wording right. Does that work for you?
Well, at that point, it's just a table amendment, right? If we go citywide, it's just a table amendment.
Yeah, it would only be a table amendment because the amendment we proposed was about urban residential.
It's a table amendment and potentially just eliminating complete sections. You know, the parking exemptions wouldn't really apply because
Correct.
So you would take those sections of the code out.
That's right. That is correct. Confirm and voice.
Yeah, absolutely. And I'm comfortable, obviously, not having to ever see that again.
Commissioner Bean, do you have anything to say?
I love it. I don't understand the logistics because some of these procedural stuff confuses me, but I support removing the parking minimum citywide, 100%.
Is that a motion?
Oh, I don't know. That's when I get nervous. I get nervous about the particulars and the technical. I'm like, oh.
Let's hear it. It sounded like one.
We'll open the public comment at 8:06. Anyone?
Yeah, let's get on the record.
I hate parking minimums. I walk around my neighborhood. I live in West Asheville, and I'm very excited to see cottage courts popping up, West Side Walk, and the compact cottages ones that's down in the river valley are really exciting to me. Haven't done the math, but it looks to me like a whole lot of that property is dedicated to automobile infrastructure, like more than half of it, which is problematic. I own an eighth of an acre behind the Admiral, and if I were to build housing for my blue-collar friends in my backyard, I would almost definitely have to knock down my entire house and pave the whole front yard. So, sounds like this is gonna go well. I've been here for 3 hours and I'm having a good time right now, which is crazy, right? And I just want to let you know that we will mobilize people for the next step as well.
I was just about to ask that, and I really appreciate that because I think the next step is potentially a hurdle, and so I think there's going to be probably public opinion on both sides, and so mobilizing support for reducing or eliminating the minimums, I think, will be helpful.
Let's go. Whether you're a bleeding heart humanitarian or a free market capitalist, parking minimums were bad.
To that comment, though, I would encourage people to go back and listen to the public debate at council when the bike lane project was proposed on Cox and Batten, because I do think there are valid and significant concerns within the community about losing some parking, and I think those are, we all owe like some respect and listening ear to some of those concerns, but I also want to eliminate the parking minimum, so acknowledge both those things.
Anyone else like to speak? Whoa, oops. Seeing none, I'll close public comment at 8:08. It's feeling like there's unanimous support for eliminating parking minimums for all residential projects citywide. Would anybody like to make any further comment, question, or suggestions on how we do a motion?
I'll just make a quick other comment, and then I can make a motion, I think. Yeah, I think if multimodal is supporting this, the conversations I've had, not in this room, but, with other groups is, just trying to make sure our different committees and commissions are working together. And I think if multimodal says this helps their cause, I think we should fall in line to a degree. We need to show them support and be on their side.
Agreed. And I'll just, extend some thanks to staff for your creativity, bringing something back and really thinking through administrative burdens and the impact of what we were proposing versus just going citywide. It's really, really helpful for our discussion and deliberation, so thanks for that. Anybody like to make a motion?
Oh, I closed my computer.
I'll take a stab at it. I move to approve the proposed wording amendments to include a citywide parking exemption. Wording amendment to Chapter 7 of the Asheville Code of Ordinances, and find that the proposed amendments are reasonable and are in the public interest and are consistent with the city's comprehensive plan and meet the development needs of the community, in that the amendments will, number one, prioritize growth and development within designated growth areas, to promote the development of transit supportive centers in coordination with strategies for all of the growth areas recommended in the Living Asheville, and 3, reduces administrative barriers to housing development and diversification.
I'll second.
Can I just clarify, so did you revise the proposed amendment to be citywide?
Yes, in the very beginning.
For residential?
Residential, yes, sorry.
Residential citywide.
Add that to it, yes. And
Okay.
friendly amendment.
I'll second. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? All right, the motion passes unanimously. Thank you all, and that's it. So if you had fun tonight, the next meeting of the Planning and Zoning Commission will be Thursday, July 11th at 5 p.m. here in this room, with a pre-meeting in the 5th floor conference room.
Real quick, before we move to adjourn, I would like to address